Consequence Podcast Network.
My friendship to all of you precludes my involvement with any one of you. But if you wanna make love, then I do too, and I'll be right there behind you. All in the name of oh, all in the name of oh, all in the name of
Greetings, constant listeners, and welcome to another episode of the Losers Club, a Stephen King podcast. I am one of your co-hosts, Dan Caffrey, and I am down here in the Peach State. I am in the very state where this book takes place. I'm looking out my window from here at Georgia Pines in my retirement home. I'm an old man now. I gotta dodge Brad Norton. He's gonna come in any minute and tell me to stop recording this podcast, and he's going to throw me down the ground, and my friend Elaine will have to come over and console me, and we'll go see a little mouse in the woods. And if I look a little bit past the pines outside my window, I can see the looming Cold Mountain Penitentiary. That doesn't even make sense because I don't think it would be around at that timeline of the book, but I'm just rolling with it. So
we're going with it. Yeah,
we're going with it. So yeah, I'm your one of your co-hosts today, and we are, of course, talking about Stephen King's The Green Mile, the original serial novel, also in a single volume, which I have on my desk. But I'm not alone here in the retirement home. I have a bunch of other old fogies with me who I'm excited to hear from and be with and discuss this wonderful book with. First, who do I have just a few states northwest of me in the great state of Tennessee? Who is that?
Hey, this is Jenn Adams,
Oh.
and I'm excited because I'm the closest one to the host today. Normally it's everyone in Chicago and then me down in the valley.
I'm the closest emotionally, though.
That's true.
yeah. Pfleegor and I have known each other.
Oh yeah.
Since he took the words right out of my mouth. Who is our first person with the letter D as their first name in Chicago?
Oh, wow. Smooth. I got to say smooth. Well, this is Dan, Billy the Kid, Pfleegor.
Oh.
My best character, my favorite character. I don't see anything wrong with him.
Yeah, he's a great guy.
Wow.
He's a great person.
I just stayed to host this. My mouth is full. I'm ready to record.
Oh, God.
Is your mouth full of moon pie? Just
Gross.
disgusting moon pie. Ugh, nasty.
Just
I
skip
actually
right
don't
to
like
pound
moon
cake.
pies. Yeah, seriously.
And who else is here in Chicago?
Well, we got Michael Mudhole Roffman.
Oh man.
Actually, no, I'll keep it PC and PG. Michael, Mr. Jingles Roffman, just
that's good,
wheeling
yeah.
that little, the thread with the crayons and the great watercolors and whatever. But I'm having a great day on this rainy, disgusting, chilly morning here in Chi-Town. So very happy to be on this episode and bask in the balminess of the God's glow.
Is it really really
gross.
cold there today, or is it just like
it's
a
freezing.
nasty?
It's
yeah.
miserable.
I kind of like
disgusting.
that though.
I
do too.
I wish it were cold here.
Look, I do, but then it's also kind of rainy. So it was like walking around one of the dogs that we're watching over this weekend, and just like standing outside, and even the dog is just like, all right, I'm done. Get me the fuck out of here. And I was like, hey, we're both the same mind. So we went back inside and I studied for this. I was getting excited. This is my first book episode, and God, since Needful Things earlier this year. And
oh wow, really?
Believe it or not, after doing like 100 episodes with Jenn, this is my first book episode with Jenn, which is kind of crazy. So
I'm trying to remember what I feel like I've been on mostly Patreon episodes as of late. I'm trying to think of the last book. I know I did one book episode since we've...
You did Nightmares and
been in Atlanta.
Dreamscapes.
Nightmares and Dreamscapes, yeah, which feels forever ago, although I guess
Yeah.
it wasn't that long ago.
I know. I always say turn off the TV and open a book. So I've been on a few this year, but whatever.
I've actually met several screenwriters, like successful screenwriters, who have written episodes of TV I really like, and they're nice and everything. They're not bad people, but I'll ask them about TV, like their TV habits or what they like, and they'll say, "Oh, I don't really watch much TV," and I think that's such bullshit. I'm like, you like write for TV. I mean, maybe you don't have time to watch it, but you can't make money off writing great TV episodes and then act like you're above it. I don't know. It really bothers me when people say that.
I agree.
Yeah.
But
no,
anyway,
the same people are going home and opening Perfect Strangers DVDs. So.
Yeah,
which is great. I love Perfect Strangers.
I love Perfect Strangers. Yeah, that's one of my favorite. What was the? Is it Bronson Pinchot who's in that?
Bronson Pinchot,
who also
and,
narrates a lot of Stephen King audiobooks.
He does.
Yeah.
He read Eyes of the Dragon.
Isn't he in the Langoliers? Right?
Yeah,
He is. Yeah, he's the bad guy.
Man,
His name I can't remember.
He's a bad boy. Well, hey, we're not here to talk about the Langoliers, right? We're here to talk about the Green Mile, which, of course, and we'll get in. We have a lot to get into with this book, but as I'm sure all of our listeners know, this was a little bit of a fork in the road for Stephen King. It's, I think, so far. Correct me if I'm wrong. I think it's his only serial novel. I know he's had novellas that have come out in different parts. Like, it didn't In the Tall Grass come out in separate installments when it was first published? I could be wrong.
I believe it was
in
the magazine, wasn't it? I thought it was just like a magazine piece that he had. So, this was like an experiment for him because he wanted to do something that was like Dickensian in a way.
Because Dickens would always. I don't know if he published all of his novels that way, but a lot of them would come out in this serialized form, so over several months. The way this came out was once a month. We would get these little slim volumes, which are those pretty hard to find? Because I have a first edition of the complete thing, but I have not seen the individual volumes of these 6 novellas anywhere.
That's what I was going to ask you, because you are pretty much a firsthand constant reader, and I was definitely reading Stephen King by the time that this was coming on. And I remember these actually dropping, like walking around in Borders or B. Dalton or whatever I was going at the time in like the 90s. And I remember seeing these like slim paperbacks, and it always surprised me because, I'd see King, and especially at that time, I didn't have the hindsight that I do now, of knowing that, he did a multitude of different genres. At that time I still saw him just as a horror writer. Mm-hmm. So I thought like, ooh, the Green Mile, this looks spooky. But this is actually my first time read. Like I actually never sat down to read it. Even though I've seen those paperback serial novels like in libraries at the B. Dalton that I had mentioned before.
I feel like they were at Publix when it came out.
They were
I remember
too.
seeing
Yeah.
them in the slim volumes at Publix. And
actually, not to toot my own horn, but for Mike's girlfriend for Christmas, I got her the 6
You did?
paperbacks.
Oh, where do you find them?
Secret sources.
Ooh. Did you get them from old Toot Toot?
No, I bought them on. Yeah, I bought it from Toot Toot on usedbooks.com. But no, it was fun because I think she read them in like a week. It's something
no,
about
not even that. It was
pocket.
like 2 days, I think.
Yeah, she tore through them, but you realize like each section is only about 100 pages, so it's a quick read, but it's a fun read.
And Pfleegor, had you read this one that came out originally, or was this your first time?
I've read it before, yes. Not when it originally came out, but probably in, I think, 2007, I read it for the first time in full.
You probably tried to read it when it came out, and your dad was just like, what is this garbage? I can't have this in my house.
Like,
this isn't how the jail works.
My dad's like, this not Bible.
Has your dad ever been a CO on death row?
No, but my dad is a retired correction officer.
Oh, wow.
So he would weigh in. So me and Caffrey, when we were growing up too, we would watch Oz, and my dad would just walk in and be like, that's fake.
I mean, he is right too. I mean, I love Oz, but after those first 3 seasons, I mean, it gets so insane.
Isn't there like an angel and a ghost in Oz or something like that?
There's like visions and
supernatural
Is
stuff.
that not real in prison?
And I was like, no, Dad, he does float in a 3-dimensional cube that symbolizes our mental incarceration.
Oz gets to the point eventually by seasons 5 and 6. I mean, there's like 3 people getting killed every episode in this prison. Like they would get shut down without question. Jen, what about you? What was your first experience with the book?
Well, I actually read these as they came out, and
Nice.
Yes, I'm holding my 6 original copies.
You still have them?
I do.
Cool.
Yeah, I'll turn my video on real quick if you want to see them.
They almost look like, I'm looking at the cover of just the first one, the 2 dead girls. It's funny how they have the part.
That's so cool.
They have like the part 1 seal on them. It almost looks like a Goosebumps book or something.
They do.
It really does, yeah. And I remember I would have been 15 or 16, begging my mom to take me to Book World to get these as they came out. This may have been the first one that I read like as it came out as a Stephen King fan. And I love it. And like it's one that I've gone back to. Reading it this time was a bit different experience, but I've read this audiobook a lot. Like this was one of my go-tos before I discovered podcasts too. And the audiobook is really good.
Who does the
narrates
audiobook? Yeah.
Frank Muller, which I
Frank
think
Muller,
is
yes.
he's he reads a lot of Stephen King.
Nice.
When it's not like a name, he's usually one. And I think he actually had an accident a couple of years ago, and Stephen King was trying to raise money for him because I think they're pretty good friends.
Yeah, it was a motorcycle accident. Yeah.
Man, Stephen King and that's I always say in this podcast, the motorcycles are bad news. Stephen
They
King
are,
needs to
yeah.
get out of the bike culture. It's they're too dangerous.
It's like the Venn diagram. If you know Stephen King and you're around motorcycles, it's trouble.
bad
Yeah.
news. Well, let's go ahead and so I have the first edition of all 6 serial novels compiled into one thing. It was the first time it was in one volume, which is actually interesting. We'll talk about it when we get into structure and format, how effective the cliffhangers are when they're not spread out across 6 separate volumes. So why don't I go ahead? I'll read this, the full volume synopsis here on the back. But then Jen, maybe if you want to, since you have the 6 original ones, maybe if you want to just pick one and maybe the 2 Dead Girls and read after that. I'd be curious to see how they sound differently. So here we go. I'm not going to read that part. That's just the context. At Cold Mountain Penitentiary, along the lonely stretch of cells known as the Green Mile, killers as depraved as the psychopathic Billy the Kid Wharton and the possessed Edward Delacroix await death strapped in Old Sparky. Here, guards as decent as Paul Edgecombe and as sadistic as Percy Wetmore watch over them. But good or evil, innocent or guilty, none have ever seen the brutal likes of the new prisoner, John Coffey, sentenced to death for raping and murdering 2 young girls. Is Coffey a devil in human form? Or is he a far, far different kind of being? There are more wonders in heaven and hell than anyone at Cold Mountain can imagine, as the truth emerges in shockwaves that only Stephen King could create, and a blast of revelation that will truly blow your mind. That's actually one of the better synopses, I think. It doesn't have any of the weird, like gut-punchingly unsettling nail. I feel like they just go nuts with the adverbs. What about yours, Jen? If maybe you want to pick just one of those volumes.
Well, they each have their own blurbs on the back, and let me pick The Bad Death of Edward Delacroix. Time has run out for one of the inmates on Cold Mountain Penitentiary. Edward Delacroix is set to take that final walk down the Green Mile, but first he must say goodbye to the guards, to his fellow inmates, and to a strange creature that forever changed his life. Little does he know of the terrible fate that awaits him and of a devilish plan of revenge.
That's a hell of a synopsis for a short 100-page, sliver.
I know. It clocks in
almost as
at
long as-
89 pages.
I was going to say, I mean, like when I was reading this and, trying to imagine that they're the separate books and, Pfleegor, I did not mark up Sammy's books, so I bought my own copy, which is actually weird because
Good.
Yeah. Well, I just don't like marking up like first editions and stuff. And I've actually done book episodes where I had only the paperback first edition, and then by the end of it, it's just destroyed. Like the front cover is and it's just sad. So didn't do that with these. Left them intact. And actually, what's weird is that my grocery store, Jewel, that's across the street from me, I always notice that they have like one Stephen King novel that they always are like, promoting or putting out there. And so for the last couple of years that I've lived outside, like lived in Wrigleyville and with this Jewel, I've noticed like some really strange, inclusions of King in there that are like, like one time they had like The Running Man. The other one they had like The Girl Who Loved Tom Gurdon. Like then they had The Long Walk at one point. I was like, wow, who the hell is ordering these books? And then as I was walking out, like sometime like in the end of the summer, maybe, I like noticed that the Green Mile was there. And, I got to say, it was like when Mr. Jingles pops up and sees Paul at the end a little bit. I was like, hey, how serendipitous was this? So I picked up that one. And so it's kind of like the modern one. It has, it's the pocketbooks edition. So
we should. Yeah, mine is Plume. That's the and it has like the Coffee silhouetted on the Green Mile with Mr. Jingles just in the corner popping up to say hello. And it says,
yeah, no Mr. Jingles for me. They try to really sell the idea that Stephen King is a spooky author.
I do think it's funny though that everyone who mentioned the synopsis, they mentioned the devil. Is this person the devil? Is it a devil? And it's quite the opposite. It's just funny that they would. I wonder if because it's Stephen King, they feel the need to be like, don't worry, there's some kind of evil monster.
Right.
And it is interesting, and obviously we'll get into it when we get into the cemetery and when we talk about some of the characters. I mean, there are some truly unsettling parts of the book. I was actually a little bit surprised at one of what I consider the grisliest scene in the book, how gross it is in the novel, especially compared to the movie that we'll get to. But yeah, it's funny. They really, even when King is not writing horror per se, because I would consider this almost magical realism or even a prison drama. They always try and sell that a little bit. And it's funny because when you meet Coffey, I mean, yeah, he is in prison for supposedly raping and murdering 2 young girls, but right away there's nothing really scary about him. You know, they talk about his size, but it is funny because I feel like they make it this suspenseful thing of, oh, is he an angel or a devil? And I'm like, I don't know. They make it pretty clear.
I will say though, when you look at a man's size, so I had a friend who was about 6'6", 300 pounds, and when I used to go out to bars with him, he would be like, "Watch how the bouncer looks at me." And we would walk in, you could see them sort of giving him a once up and down, being like, "Wow, if this guy goes nuts, there's no one in this room that can stop him." And I never noticed that before. As a man, you know, decent stature, but not gigantic. 6'8", 400 pounds. There's
a certain thing. If you're, regardless of whether you're ferocious or strong or not, I mean, there's a thing. If you're a certain size, right, you're just hard to move. But well, hey, we'll get into all these characters. But first, let's talk about just the overall concept of the book. Maybe some of its themes, maybe some of the big picture areas we want to get into in a section that we like to call the hook.
Ah, yes. Don't you see? Don't you see how clear it all is? Not only can you see the future, I can change it. You can change it, exactly.
Welcome to The Hook. I always thought it would be cool if we had The Hook by Blues Traveler play before we...
I was just thinking that in my head.
Dude, you know, it's funny because we did.
Is that what I originally had?
Yes, that's what we had. Yeah, no, we had that, and then I realized that we would get sued. So, John Popper would just come up my door and be like, you gotta take it off. You know.
Oh, I thought he was here right now.
Yeah, right. Have you all ever seen the footage of when he because he has lots of stomach issues because he had gastric bypass surgery and he's had a lot of substance abuse and whatnot, and this has happened in concert. He'll blow his harmonica so hard that he vomits, like vomit will come out of the harmonica. It's so gross. I've seen the footage of it here and there.
I remember he was on Howard Stern and he was pulling out like 4 different knives that were on his
he's
person.
Crazy. Yeah, he's always getting pulled over for weapons and things like that, which is funny because
he's always getting pulled over and asked about the Kingpin soundtrack.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, I love that. But anyway,
I love that one.
That's a good song. Yeah. But anyway, he's like, I
love that. Yeah.
But anyway, but that's how he sounds. But hey, we're not talking about John Popper. We're talking about John Coffey in the greenhouse.
Nice.
Love it.
Obviously, the central draw of this book, and I would say the overall theme, right, from a really far away, big picture overhead point of view, is miracles happening in the most horrible places, right? So here we have it takes place on the Green Mile, which is death row, Block E of the Cold Mountain State Penitentiary. And it is from the point of view of all these different corrections officers who are essentially in charge of ushering different rapists, murderers, criminals to their deaths. So not a great place to be, obviously a pretty miserable place to be. And then in the middle of all this, we see something extraordinary come onto the Green Mile, and it becomes this issue of salvation. And what do you do when a miracle pops up in an unlikely place? That's like the very big picture view of this. And on top of that, I think you could also say that, it's a prison drama, it's magical realism, all that. Obviously, there's a pretty big racial element to this as well that we'll really start to get into as we talk about various characters, especially John, but not just John Coffey. I think when the others and their attitudes toward John Coffey and just
it's pervasive.
And like what he has to go through, what Coffey has to go through from a purely optical level. And that's not to say, I don't think any of us think that Stephen King is a flat out racist or bigot or anything like that. But there are definitely some things to discuss as we get into the characters and the rest of the book. Just issues that maybe read a little bit differently today in a 2020 context than they did back when the book first came out. So we just wanted to front load that a little bit and just recognize it is something that we're going to be talking about. But what do y'all think just about that stuff or the hook or anything else.
I had a question for everyone here, and I couldn't really find any quotes on this because most of the stuff that King talks about with regards to this book has to do more with just execution and how he wrote it. But I did wonder that if this book came from, or the conceit of this book came from like the Central Park 5 or like the, like West Memphis 3. I mean, like the West Memphis 3, like had literally happened like in 93, 94. Like Pearl Jam had been ones that were campaigning around it. And like, King is always kind of hip to that stuff. And like, and I wondered if this idea, because I mean, if you think about it, like the whole thing is like this like anti-capital punishment manifesto wrapped in like a Baptist parable, right? And so
yeah, that's a good way to describe it.
Especially towards the end when you start realizing like the characters, and he basically foreshadows this the entire time, is that these people realize that they don't want to be doing like basically making the choice to take a life. Like who should be the one that takes life. I mean, like Paul literally walks away. They all walk away for the most part. And so it does feel like this kind of not a cautionary tale, but just like a manifesto in a sense. Yeah. And then in that medium, King is able to kind of wrestle with all his other themes. Like he has that sort of good versus evil discussion towards the end. We see it kind of physically manifest whenever Coffee is actually trying to kind of change the ways of the world at that moment, which actually has a little bit of King's Dominion there, I think. There's the themes of atonement, the gift of, the idea. It's almost like it's obviously a conscious, mirroring metaphor of Jesus Christ. I mean, JC, John Coffey, it's pretty literal there. But
I think he even says in the intro, right, that, I wanted to make my Christ figure.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you're asking then, like, but was the racial element the idea of throughout history? I mean, black men getting unfairly executed and in prison, was that front of mind? Yeah.
And I wonder if it was exacerbated because of stuff that was happening in the media at the time with like the Central Park 5, in the West Memphis.
Well, and the LA riots were in the early 90s too. Yeah. Yeah, I think I really see Stephen King struggling with white guilt in this and kind of like trying to feel out how he feels about it. And I think partly because it's written in the first person and it feels like you're so in tune with Paul and his thought processes and really kind of wrestling with things. And I think it's that's kind of where a lot of the problems with the book that I have with the book come in. But that's kind of like I give him points for trying, because I think there are a lot of people that don't examine that kind of thing. And I think like I appreciate that he didn't get it all right. And I think he got some things very wrong in this book. But I think he is willing to examine his biases, because everybody has biases, because your biases are informed by your experiences and the lens through which you view the world. And Stephen King, I think, has just grown up with a very white lens. And there's nothing wrong with that. What is wrong is when you're not aware of it and you're not aware of how it affects others. And I really see him wrestling with that. And I don't know if it's maybe the OJ trial or the LA riots that were kind of fresh in his mind, probably the Central Park 5 as well.
See, yeah, I see a lot of To Kill a Mockingbird, actually. And I think this was his sort of take on that. And some of the issues I have with that book are also issues I have with this, but I feel like he was maybe setting out, regardless of what was going on at the time, like he tried to be ahead of his time, and maybe at the time it came out he was 10 years ahead, but now it feels 20 years behind the times.
It does, yeah. And it's one of those things of trying to be an ally without fully understanding the problem, and so you end up creating kind of a bigger problem or a different problem, And I feel like as I've read his writing over the last 20 years, I see him continuing to struggle with this and continuing to get it wrong and continuing to get it right. And like, again, I give him credit for that, but this is just kind of, I think, his first kind of exploration of that.
And I should say too that, when I mean, not just Stephen King books, but a lot of stories that involve sticky issues with race that were written by white people back then, the book to me seemed very anti-racist when I first read it and when I first saw the movie, right? And so it's this thing of like, I feel like the way, maybe not everyone, but at least people in our circle, white people, white critics, are starting to examine race and talk about inclusion and all the rest of this. I mean, that's changed a lot, even just the past 5 years. Like, I don't know, like this was the first time reading The Green Mile where I had some misgivings a little bit about John Coffey. And I should say too, it's funny because, I don't have problems with the accuracy or the characterization necessarily of John Coffey. I don't know if the rest of you feel that way. I actually feel like he feels realistic. I mean, as realistic as someone who can heal people can. For me, it really is just a matter of optics. When you have literally the only person of color character in the book, I think, when you have him essentially spending most of the book in a prison cell or in an electric chair or healing white people, and then to have him only get killed at the end, whether he wants to or not. I know a big part of the book is, he wants to die, and I understand why he wants to die, but just the optics of that feel weird, right? And I struggle with that because I actually love this book just from a story perspective. Like I think this is some of King's best prose and writing, and I think the serial format actually it makes him really expertly plotted out. I don't think he fumbles the way he does sometimes in his more overlong books. So it is this thing of it, not just as a white writer, but a white reader being able to come to terms with, okay, you can really love this book and appreciate it from a literary level and really find it to be one of his most engaging stories, while also identifying some of the, some of the racial blunders I think that he goes through in this. And I don't know, I wonder if listeners are like, man, y'all are in the hook and you're already getting really in depth and heavy. But like I said, I think it is important to talk about this at the front, even though this is obviously not, I don't think on Stephen King's mind when he wrote it necessarily, but like you all were saying, that I think white guilt is a huge part of this book, both in the central character and the man who's writing it. So yeah, we just want to kind of get that
telling that Paul is, it extends beyond him just, being someone that works as a correctional officer. He literally is a writer in the outset. I mean, the narrator is a writer.
He's actually writing, in his journal and diary,
and we've read King long enough and we've studied him long enough to know when King is actually kind of just wielding his own insight and point of view into it. I mean, there are several indications that King is speaking from his past as a writer while trying to give attributes to Paul. I mean, he does it with every one of his writer characters, but you can certainly see it here, and you can almost kind of see. I mean, this is maybe a little bit more of in structure and format, but he definitely kind of peppers in this story with like admissions. Like the narrator's own admissions of like, well, this was, this happened a long time ago, yada yada yada, and like, so there's a lot of basically conditioning on the narrator's point of view. He's basically creating a lot of certain admissions that allow him to kind of get away with the sense of time, but then also basically give us an authority for him being a writer in the first place. And in King, and I think that's kind of speaks to what you're saying, Jen, and that like maybe that the themes do connect in the sense that this is coming from the point of view of a writer. And that is that his own admission of guilt in that sense. But, it would still doesn't dismiss the problem of the Magical Negro. I mean, like that's still, it's still a conundrum that haunts this.
And it's not just the Magical Negro, I think, because in my day job, one of the things I've been doing for the past year, I work for a curriculum company, and we're examining the implicit bias or the deficit ideology in our curriculum and folk songs from like this time period, which were used in minstrel shows. And so I'm looking really closely at that. And so my brain is just already in the zone of seeing the underlying things throughout the story, because he's not the only character of color in a cell. Like we see Bitterbuck and we see
that's right.
What's her name? I can't remember her name. Oh gosh, at the very beginning, I think it's Beverly McCall or Beverly Matuomi. And then there's Delacroix, who is, would be considered white now, but he's presented as other because he's Cajun and he's speaking a different language. And all of these prisoners are presented as dumb or as stupid and like presenting these, like committing these low crimes. And then when you look at the Prez, who is the only white man other than Wild Bill we see in a cell, like his crime is like
white collar crime.
Exactly. It's a white collar crime. It's like a calculated crime. And so I see, and like I made a whole column of like the little, I don't want to use the word microaggressions, but just kind of pervasive like mentions of racial elements that lead to this kind of deficit ideology. And I think he's writing from a premise that Paul is the better person. And I don't know if he necessarily believes that. I think that's just what he's grown up with. And I think also, and that's what the deficit ideology is when you go in, like we meet John Coffey as a criminal.
Yeah.
And so that, and I think the point of the book is to change that narrative, but he doesn't do it with the other characters. And I think it's like fortified by the rest of the way he describes everything. And it's also, when you're writing first person, it's hard to distinguish the authorial voice and the character's voice. So I feel like a lot of this comes across as endorsement when I don't know if it necessarily is. And that's kind of where I see him really wrestle with that.
Yeah, I mean, especially in that, I'm thinking of the scene with Paul and Bert Hammersmith. I feel like where that's where it all kind of comes to a head, you know, where it's because Paul definitely has his own racial biases, and I actually think. And once, not to get ahead of ourselves, I think the Paul in the novel is more of a dick than Paul in the movie, which we'll wait for. But yeah, but I mean, Paul is no angel when it comes to all of this either, and he's definitely I mean, him and all the guards, they are complicit in this system. Well, I mean, we have our work cut out for us, ladies and gents. As we go along.
Let's describe, and discuss the actual like magical Negro trope, just because there, some listeners coming in might not, know what it is, and they might, be like kind of like, what the hell are they talking about? So, might as well kind of lay into like the facts and like what that is. And I pulled out a few sources, all of which you could actually read in the links in the description of this episode. And they're great editorials that are not only just tied to the Green Mile, but also King's
just
prose
good King writing. Like
but one of the pieces was from Nnedi Okorafor, and she really does a really good explicit rundown of the trope in her piece, Stephen King's Super Duper Magical Negroes, which is actually a reference to Spike Lee, who came out against this movie for kind of reprising the Magical Negro trope. But this is what she says. She writes, "Here's what I call the 5 points of the Magical Negro, the 5 most common attributes." And it's pretty telling because they all pretty much check the boxes here with like the Green Mile checks all these boxes for the most part. He or she is a person of color, typically black, often Native American, in a story about predominantly white characters. He or she seems to have nothing better to do than help the white protagonist, who is often a stranger to the Magical Negro at first. He or she disappears, dies, or sacrifices something of great value after or while helping the white protagonist. He or she is uneducated, mentally handicapped, at a low position in life, or all of the above. He or she is wise, patient, and spiritually in touch, close to the earth, one might say. He or she often literally has magical powers. I mean, John Coffey pretty much checks every one of these boxes.
Yep. Not much else to him, too.
Yeah. And and she ultimately, I mean, it's a really, really long rundown, and it would basically take up the majority of this episode if I went all over it. But ultimately, what she contends is that, the archetype of the Magical Negro is an issue of race. It is the subordination of a minority figure masked as the empowerment of one. The Magical Negro has great power and wisdom, yet he or she only uses it to help the white man character. He or she is not threatening because he or she only seeks to help, never hurt. The white main character's well-being comes before the Magical Negro's because the main character is of more value and more importance. And there are a few other pieces that I definitely pulled out. One was, and I'm just going to digress. Sorry, everyone. I just figured this would be a good point to put it here. But writer Scott Woods is pretty much dedicated a good portion of his life to King, and he actually calls himself the stockbroker of King's Magical Negroes, which I thought was a really funny line. But in his 2015 article for Union Station magazine, he wrote, Stephen King's Magical Negro problem isn't magical. Woods writes, if a black person shows up in a King novel, they stand a 50% chance of possessing a supernatural ability. No foul there. The man has been America's preeminent writer of horror for decades. Yet there is a 99% chance that whatever black character appears, be they magical or not, their presence will serve only to enhance, advance, save, or develop white characters. And now, before you go off and say like, oh, well, they're condemning King, all these writers are pretty explicit in the sense that they actually do really appreciate King's work, but they also they ultimately they conclude that it's something that we've already kind of hinted at, is that it's just a matter of point of view and growing up and where you're from. Like King has great intentions. I mean, he literally, in Woods talks about this in one of his more recent articles about how like King has actually become more woke in recent times. But the problem is that, and this is the joke that he keeps, not even really a joke, but just his basic his thesis is that he just needs more black friends because he doesn't really know the black experience. He doesn't really. It's coming in from these like these broader platitudes, which is obviously going to have King lean more on tropes, right? So, one of the things that he had, which is really in one of the same piece that I actually just read at, is he writes that it's about Maine. He talks about Maine, which is really interesting because he gets at the crux of it. It's like, note that the question here isn't whether or not Stephen King is racist per se. Racism is an indefatigable occupation of American culture. So aligning anyone outside of its reach is barely an argument at all, let alone while applying it to someone who's lived in Maine all his life. Only 1.3 million people live there to begin with. And as of 2013, only 1.4% of them are black. That's a mere 18,200 people. That's a Prince concert. That statistic that statistic is so far below the national average. I am left questioning whether or not black people are legally allowed in the state of Maine. So, and that's honestly something that I discussed with Tanana Reeve-Dew and Stephen Barnes in our interview last year from, I think it was like maybe March of 2019. And, because I addressed the, Mother Abigail and a few other characters in King's Dominion. And they said the same thing. They said, well, look where he's grown up, It's basically just a cognitive dissonance there. Although they did come out and say, and they did say that's like, well, by the Green Mile, he probably should have known better.
Yeah.
I would say we've been having, Harriet Beecher Stowe wrote Uncle Tom's Cabin in the 1850s, right? Which also has the magical Negro trope of, a character that's a little more subservient, very innocent. That's the way, they can deal with him because he's, don't worry, he's just nice, he helps. But I also, I take some issue with some of the King stuff because, we live in Chicago, Mike and I here, and Chicago is about a third black population-wise, but that doesn't necessarily also mean there's other issues here of
Chicago's very segregated too.
Yeah, it's very segregated neighborhood. So the fact that King lives in Maine, okay, I get that critique. I think the Prince line is good. But I also, I would not consider myself more entitled to write about these issues just because I live in a city that is more diverse than assume, where he lives in Maine. But I think it's one of these things where, and you want to balance the character with the effect of erasure. You don't want to just act like there aren't black characters in these historical novels. But I do think if you ask King now what he thinks about the Green Mile, I'm sure he would have much different outlook on the character. Maybe he would not have written it now. But yeah, no, it's telling that we've spent 20 minutes now talking about this, that it is important and it is something that people looking back on their work sometimes reevaluate.
Yeah, and like I said, we have a lot of specific things to get into, especially when we get into the character of John Coffey. But what do y'all think? If we is that enough preamble? Should we get into the next category? And if you agree with me, I'll say the category, and that will be my transition. But it's up to you.
I'm ready to roll.
If you say the category, that means we agree with you. Okay.
Get ready, everyone, because we're moving on to the cleverly titled Structure and Format.
Look at me. Look at me, teacher. Look.
So, structure and format is the place where we talk about the structure and format of a Stephen King book.
Seamless.
All joking aside, it's a big deal for this one because, like we said, the serial format, this essentially broken down into 6 mini novels or mini novellas, whatever you want to call them. So my final volume of everything compiled into one place is, let's see, about 465 pages. So I guess that's like not even 100 pages per little slim volume, right? Jen, how many is the Two Dead Girls? How many pages is that?
The Two Dead Girls is they're all about 100 pages, and then the last one, Coffee on the Mile, is like 130.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess they're a little bit slimmer, just and shorter.
Yeah,
than the big
and there's
one.
like the ad pages and like the title cards and stuff.
Well, so something I want to ask you about, and it's funny, in this single volume, King does an intro of how successful he thought the serial format was. And something he talks about maybe not working quite so well when it's all compiled into one volume is the idea of the cliffhanger, right? So this is even if you watch serials on TV, if the cowboy is riding his horse toward the cliff and he's about to get shot off of it and fall down the cliff, the way they would get around that the next time, right, is they would actually show the few seconds leading up to that and slightly alter it. So it's like essentially creating.
He did get out of the cockadoodie car.
Yeah, no, exactly. And so, that's right, because in Misery, she totally brings that up. Did they call it the cliffhanger in that? I can't remember. In the book, did they refer?
I think so. I think Paul's like, "Hey, Andy, here's a super smart word I know," but he has to say it nicely.
So King is obviously very much aware of this trope. I mean, he even mentions that he grew up watching serials and listening to radio serials and reading those books and everything like that. And he talks about how he made a few changes when he put it into one volume, but wanted to keep them intact for the most part. And so I guess my question for you all is, do you think that works well? Essentially, in the beginning of each volume, once we go back into the past, because it's written with the framing device of Paul being at Georgia Pines, and then we go back into the past, King tends to repeat himself a little bit. He essentially gives us the last few pages of what we read before that. And my question for y'all is, do you think that works? King says he feels like it works in certain places, but not everywhere. And I don't know if he'll ever do this, but he was saying he might actually do some more rewrites to kind of bind it together a little bit more than it is now. Yeah, but what do y'all think?
I mean, I think it really works. I think that it adds to the momentum. You know, one of the biggest King flexes is his foreshadowing. And it's something that I've kind of harped on for ever since we started this podcast, is that he always puts these little lines, you know, like the big one is in Pet Sematary when you basically says that Gage is going to die. And you haven't even gotten to that sequence yet. But he uses that to his advantage here. And obviously it worked really well for when they were separate serial novels. But I think, you know, just reading it as one complete tome right now, I thought it really added to just the breezability of this novel. And I kind of like the idea that he was able to start kind of like pick up each, you know, book where we kind of left off in a way, but kind of he got clever with it, because eventually as you start to spend a little bit more time with older Paul, you know, like Century Paul, he was able to, you know, get into a little bit more of get a little more creative with these bridges from what we just read in the previous serial novel to the next one. And so I didn't have a problem with it, but I can tell that there is a lot of redundancies, but I think that's kind of part and parcel of being a writer, you know? Like,
yeah, and I think too that it's funny because the only one that really doesn't work for me, and it's not any kind of deal breaker, is the one that actually feels the most like serial Western shootout kind of thing. It's the end of The Mouse and the Mile, and essentially the cliffhanger we're left with is Billy Wharton has Dean Stanton, one of the other COs, you know, strangled, and they're deciding whether to shoot him. And it's funny because, and I think it just feels weird to me because although it's a great scene, thematically it's probably one of the least suspenseful elements of the novel. You know what I mean? Like, I actually prefer when King ends the chapters on not really plot cliffhangers per se, but thematic cliffhangers, foreshadowing things. You know, I actually think those work better than the will Cisco Sundown get past the gulch in time for the next episode? Wait and see. And that's the only. The end of The Mouse and the Mile is the only time where I really feel, because what happens then is that plot element gets resolved literally in the first like paragraph of the next one, so it just feels a little inconsequential. But Pfleegor, what were you gonna say? I heard you had to say something.
Oh no, I just when I first read it too, I read the pocketbook editions. I will say with the one funny thing again with the father who was a correction officer is they never let lethal weapons into the jail. So the idea that they would ponder shooting a person in jail.
Oh, so they're not going to have like a sidearm is what you're saying?
You would never have an arm, you know, because it could be taken and used against you, right? Yeah. So all weapons in jail, you know, unless there's like a riot or something, they have to be non-lethal just in case they're used on the correction officers. But that's just my dad being pedantic, and as I was reading it, being like, oh yeah, they wouldn't do that. But no, but I read it like, I mean, they had all come out by the time I read them, but I did like the format, and I you know, I can see, I think kind of what Mike said too, like there's a little bit of a recap when you get into each different version of it, but I think he also maybe was playing to that a little bit, because I think he really did want to make it like this sort of old serial version of a novel that he might have read growing up, or, you know, you write to the magazine, get the next edition. So I really liked the structure of it. I thought it was, you know, and it's cool to see him like, I think he had fun when he wrote them, and I think they were pretty cheap when they came out, each volume.
Well, I think, but I also, like, to that point, like, thematically it works. Because, you know, if he's an older writer who's trying to remember the times. And, like, it's kind of what I was kind of mumbling about, and I had stressed mumbling about earlier on when I was saying that King wields these, like, little admissions. You know, like, he'll say, you know, these things like, you know, like page 480 even later towards the end of the book, he'll admit to himself that, like, let me get to the passage. That would have helped. But he puts these little things in there that call to action that, you know, he is playing with time, you know, and memory and time at the same time. So, like, by being able to have the redundancies, it's almost like we're, you know, in the mind of old Paul even more so, because he's kind of like, wait, that did happen. Yes, it did happen. Well, here I am, and this is where I'm at. This is where my story is. And so, to me, it added almost to the realism.
Well, and also too, it's funny because I forgot this until I reread it this time. It's not like all the events are as linear as they're presented in the movie, or even as I remember them. A lot of the stuff that I thought happened just back to back happened before Coffee got on the mile, right? And then some of it happened after he was gone. And it's something I really do like. And I don't know if this is a result of the serialization necessarily, but I do love the fact that, like you were saying, old Paul gets to kind of comment on what ended up happening to people before we know what really happened with them. You know, just those little hints. Although I don't know, and I'll wait till we get to Misery. My only issue with the actual writing is that I think he gets a little fatalistic with some of the fates of these characters. He does that in like Stand By or in the
he
Body
does,
too.
yeah.
It's kind of ridiculous, but I'll wait on that.
But it's the king. It's what I call the king leap.
The king,
it's where he loves to just jump ahead. Yeah. And, you know, usually it obviously works in the novels, but I really think it works here because you have to. I mean,
I thought you were gonna say the king way.
Like the king way.
This is the way.
Yeah.
I think it really works here too, because like reading these one by one, I was like dying to find out what the next thing was going to be, and I had to wait for it to come out. And I think with his plotting, it helps because he's got to have at least one big event in each installment. And as much as I love the meeting notes in The Stand, I recognize that some of his novels can kind of drag in the middle.
Yeah.
And this one really doesn't, because he's locked into this. Like, he's got to have, like, there's got to be something to write about on the blurb on the back, you know.
Totally. Well, that's something I wanted to ask y'all too, and I think you just answered it, Jen. It is because some of the stereotyping aside, I really do think plot-wise, this is such a tightly wound novel. I think it's one of King's best in terms of just how it unfolds and what happens. And I do wonder, like you said, Jen, if the serialization maybe had to make him outline in a way that he didn't usually. Like, there doesn't seem. It's funny because I read, and some of y'all are reading it too. I read right after this is Desperation in the Regulators, and I won't get into my opinions of those books too much because we shall keep you in suspense. But I will say is that those books, they feel a little bit shiftless and aimless in certain parts. And I think King. It's funny. People always say, "Oh, King's endings." I actually think he struggles a little bit more in his middles sometimes. The Stand being the case in point. And I don't feel that here. I don't feel this sense of he's wandering in the desert looking for his story like his other books do. And I wonder, I mean, he hasn't said either way, but I do wonder if that's a direct result of the serialization, just having to plan things out a little bit more.
Well, I mean, he talks about it right in the introduction. You know, he basically says that, like, he had this idea of a story. He didn't know how it was going to end. I mean, he was literally writing parts of it, like in Fenway Park, watching the Red Sox. Like, and I do. Of
course, he was.
I know, right? Just like, they're my boys. But the thing I do think helped him and aided him here are those gasps where he was able to kind of stop, recalibrate, rethink, and go on. Yeah. And it's actually a question that we had recently on a Patreon episode about, like, you know, do we think that if there were 8 years between, you know, Dark Tower novels like there had been in the first 3 or 4, you know, if that sort of patience would have been afforded to the last 3 books, if they would have, if the outcome would have been much different. And absolutely, 100%, because I think King is at his best when he does give himself a little more patience. You know, I mean, like, it's not surprising that some of his greatest books happen to be ones that he really sat with for a while. You know, like Carrie was in his drawer. Pet Sematary, he basically had stowed away, and then he revisited. 11/22 is the same way. Under the Dome's the same way. I mean, The Stand is even something that he's been able to kind of go back to and basically say, I probably, surged ahead too far. But then we look back.
I mean, he
his
even
other,
revised it.
right? Yeah. And like you look at some of his other books where he just like knocks out, and sometimes he gets 10 out of 10s like Cujo, but then. The other times you get something like the Tommy knockers where it's like, okay.
Yeah.
Coked out. Well, and it's funny too because everyone attributes the Tommy knockers in a lot of those books to, it's because he was on drugs then. I'm like, no, he wrote books like that when he wasn't on drugs too.
Right. Yeah.
And I think of Blaze, that I always talk about that book, but Richard Bachman's Blaze was a trunk novel. It was something he had sitting in there for a while and then took it out and revised it. I know it's not considered, I don't think people talk about it like being one of his most iconic books necessarily, but I actually think the plotting in that is really, really good, and it's just it's like a pot boiler. But sorry, what were you gonna say, Pfleegor?
Oh no, I was gonna say I think just the fact that I think like 4 of the books actually are 96 pages exactly. The fact that 5 of them are within 90 pages, and the Coffee on the Mile is the one that's closer to 150. I think sometimes as they're published, we look at them and like, oh, what's he going to write next? But I think he definitely went into this, with a plan. He knew how to break them up.
Yeah.
I think it's kind of like with what is the Silver Bullet or Cycle
Just
of the
Cycle
Werewolf.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like when I was at Mike's house last time, I noticed he had the printed issue, and it was kind of cool to go through it and be like, oh, he's playing with this format. So I think just even whether he wrote this as a straightforward novel or he was playing with it is kind of just fun to think about looking back. The fact that he did break them out to be about 100 pages each. And I do think it is a very tight read. It's definitely one that when someone hasn't read Stephen King before, I'll say, Green Mile's pretty good. Like, check that out.
Yeah, it's a pretty accessible one. I think it's because it's not, even though, like I said, there's some really disturbing and scary things in this. I don't think it's icky.
Harsh.
Like, I wouldn't recommend. I wonder if any listeners will ask us this question. Like, what's the worst Stephen King book to recommend to someone who doesn't like horror? Like, what would be? It's like the most disgusting.
Pet Sematary.
Yeah, I did that, and my friend will never read Stephen King again.
Yeah, people. I mean, we talked about this a little while ago, but. The people I know with kids, especially when they reread Pet Sematary, they love it, but they're also like, I don't want to. This was.
That made me want to have kids.
Yeah. I want to have kids just so I can have Pet Cemetery hit me harder emotionally.
I want to have kids. I want to move to the side of a major road. The thing that also is something to discuss is, I've seen this debate a lot. Is King better as a short story writer or as a novelist? And I think he's overall just a great writer. So I wouldn't really specify it on either. But I kind of would lean a little bit more on the short story side, because when he knows how to knock out a great fucking short story, and I think that knack for brevity really speaks to the volumes here. Because he knows how to, like what Jen was saying, like every one of them has to have an event. And they do. I mean, for the most part, they really do. And I think that not only helped for planning, because he was able to kind of say, all right, well, we have 5 or 6 things that we have to kind of get and hit at. What do I surround it by? In that point, it's just, for him, it just became connective tissue. And with what also is important to note is that it's broken down between the jailers and the inmates. And that gives King all the opportunity to just kind of, squeeze in all those like short stories that he's so good at doing, those tangential stories. So it's kind of like the best medium for him. I almost kind of wish that he would do it again. Definitely not in the true crime though. I past that. But,
I think this is one of his better endings. I don't want to say it's one of his best, but I really loved the ending. I don't so much love the climax, but the ending I think is great, and because it's kind of this melancholy note, and I wonder if it was him having to kind of reckon with what he had already written, knowing that he couldn't go back and change it.
Yeah.
So kind of he couldn't go back and edit. And I know like he writes about this in On Writing, and he talks about how John Coffey was originally going to be called John Bowes, but then he kind of started to see the Christ parallel and changed it so the initials would be JC. And so I know that he did have an opportunity to like he didn't put the first edition out before he'd finished, I don't think. But like I wonder if he had already sent it off to like his editors and it was already getting proofed and stuff, and he just couldn't change it. So he had to write this ending that kind of honored all of the parts in a way that he doesn't necessarily have to.
Yeah.
He's just finishing a manuscript.
I think he wrote everything because I mean it was only a month in between each volume, right? So that would be maybe I guess he theoretically could have not written Coffee on the Mile quite yet, but yeah, I think he sent it off. Yeah, and I actually love that. And once we get to Word Processor of the Gods, the sort of way he wraps everything up at the very end, I actually really like.
Hi, I'm Jen. I love watching horror movies. I also have PTSD and I go to a lot of therapy.
I'm Lara. I have anxiety and depression and love having the shit scared out of me. Wait, what?
I'm Mike. I'm a therapist, and I love talking about horror movies and mental health.
We love horror films for how much they scare us and for how much they help us.
Because we love talking about mental health, aka how crazy we are, and the role the horror genre can play in our self-care, we started a podcast called Psychoanalysis.
Every episode, we talk about a movie and how it relates to a different topic in mental health and wellness. Whether it's a deep dive or a shorter episode in a movie that makes us feel all warm and fuzzy.
But not in a weird way.
Unless we're talking about hot horror sweaters, because then it is very weird.
True.
Very weird.
Our episodes drop every Thursday on the Consequence Podcast Network. Listen to find out
How horror can
heal.
But hey, you know, what's a good book without good characters? And by good characters, I, of course, mean that we have some heroes and we got some villains.
I'm gonna have to kill this fucking clown. Welcome to the Losers Club, asshole!
So heroes and villains is where we talk about the heroes and the villains of the novel. And in this case...
Well said.
It's the name.
There are a lot of them, and it's interesting here because I feel like a lot of times when we get to like when we get to the big ensemble books of King, you know, we go through all the characters, and by the end of it, we're like, oh my god, there's so many filler characters that just could be taken out of here, right? And in this, it's funny because I wouldn't consider the Green Mile an ensemble book, but there are a lot of characters, and I think the reason maybe it doesn't feel like they're alive is because he makes all of them, in my opinion, really count. Like, I feel like he's very aware of the function of all of them. I don't know if y'all felt that way too. I mean, we can just get into the individuals, but I actually think all the characters are, for the most part, really strong in this.
Yeah. It's hard for me to read this without seeing Tom Hanks and David Morse.
Yeah,
and,
that's what I was going to say. I think for me, because I had seen the movie so many times before this, I just kept like, just imagine, all the characters and all the cast members from the Darabont, adaptation, and because it's so reverential to this novel.
And
I mean, there's literally lines
too.
of dialogue that, like, I mean, the dialogue is literally just pulled from this story, and with the exception of maybe like one or two moments, they're all dialogue for the respective characters. So it really was hard for me. I thought there were a couple characters that I could have used a little bit more from Dean and Harry, maybe, but like. I do like, and I do thought that the name Brutal was a little like over the top, but
yeah, I was actually wondering that too. Like, yeah, I mean, okay, his name's Brutus, I get, kind of thing. And it's funny. This happens a lot when I reread novels that are so closely tied to their movie adaptations for me. Is that I'll get to a point where a character gets described as being different than they look in the movie, and then they become this weird hybrid in my mind. Like, Dean,
I agree.
Dean Stanton in the novel is a little bit younger than what's the dude who's always in Darabont stuff in the movie? He's on Walking Dead. What's that guy?
I can see him.
Yeah,
Jeffrey DeMunn.
Yeah. So like, Dean's a little bit younger in the book than he is there, and he has glasses and more hair. So I was picturing this like weird, slightly slimmer version of that dude, but with like slick back hair I'm
just imagining like Cronenbergian, like
weird,
both,
like body
conjoined,
horror
body horror of like these cast members in your head, just like
Toot was kind of like that for me because, and I think Harry Dean Stanton in the movie is great, but he's described as a little grosser and more decrepit in the book. So I was picturing this weird, like almost crypt keeper version of him. But yeah, we brought him up, and he's played by the man himself, Paul Edgecombe. Maybe good, obviously the place to start. He's the protagonist. So the thing with, all right, so he's great. Tom Hanks is great, blah, blah, blah. I thought Paul was maybe had a little bit more of a stick up his ass in the book, and specifically in how he talked. Like, I actually thought his views toward a lot of the inmates were really cold. Like, I think of the moment in the movie where remember it was in the trailer too, where he's talking to Arlen Bitterbuck about, and Arlen Bitterbuck's like, oh, do you think that the afterlife or that heaven is a man getting to relive his happiest moments? And in the movie, I think Paul Edgecombe is actually saying, when he says, oh, I do believe that very thing, I think it's sincere. But in the book, he talks about it. He's like, oh, I didn't believe that. He was a murderer, so he's going to hell. Like, I actually thought Paul was colder in the book, which wasn't a problem for me, but I don't know if the rest of y'all felt that way.
That's definitely something I noticed. And I flagged it in Misery, actually, when he's talking about Beverly and how she had a dream and she wanted to die under her spirit name. And just the dismissive way he says, I guess her spirit father didn't give her a first name, really struck me, you know. But I will say, after she tells her the name she wants, he uses that name for the rest of the time he describes her. So I feel like that's good for King. But that was one of the things that kind of bugged me about Paul. I think I have always had Tom Hanks in my mind, but this read, I had a lot of problems with his character, the way he is completely let off the hook, and how I feel like this story, because it's written through first person and because it's like his journals, the story really centers Paul and presents his story as the true tragedy in this book in a way that I don't think it is, you know?
Yeah, no, I think too, the fact that, you know, we associate it now with Tom Hanks, right? What's not to love?
Right.
But I think in the book though, he tries to be a good man, and I think in the movie he more so is a good man.
That's a good distinction.
I think it's very hard to separate. I like Caffrey too. Like, I have the hybrid of the book literary character mixed with the movie, and this is one of the more literal adaptations too for film, I think, other than like No Country for Old Men, which is almost beat for beat. Including the fact the urinary tract infection, which, you know, save it for the movie episode, but Tom Hanks is always peeing in movies, so it's so perfect for him to have this. But I think Paul is I think he would be the first to even criticize himself as maybe being a little bit old fashioned. But I think given the responsibility of his job, he really is a law and order. Let's not make waves. You know, let's kind of, you know, stiff upper lip character. You know, still likable, but not as much as the Tom Hanks portrayal.
And I think what you guys said too is that there is a theme of him paying for all this in here, right? That we maybe don't quite so get so much in the adaptation. Like, you know, between what happens to his wife and a lot of his friends and just him, he gets, because coffee heals him, he gets the gift of old age. But I would argue that Paul doesn't really think that's a good thing necessarily, right? Like, I think it does feel like he pays for his sins, not just for what happened to John Coffey, but I think just for being someone who executes men for a living, right? I mean, I don't necessarily think that King is coming down on people who have this kind of profession. I do think, except for Percy, all the guards we're supposed to think they're decent men, at least for that time period. But I do think King is saying that there is a price you pay when you traffic in death. Even though that a lot of these men have done things that are really, truly horrible, there's still a price to pay for playing their executioner, for playing God, essentially. And
I think that all the years he cut off of other men's lives sort of got added onto his own, right?
Exactly.
That's good.
Someone who ends life prematurely has an extended life, right?
And I think that duration is supposed to stress the solemnity and like the sort of singularity of that sort of guilt that he has, that no one else is really going to get it, you know, like, you know.
Yeah, it's a very specific type of guilt, I think.
And it's specific and it's personalized. And so, and they're demons that he can't really expel or exercise. And you could find comfort in being surrounded, you know, by people that love you. But once they're gone, you're just left with the demons. And I think that's what the elongated time, and I think that's what the curse that he has, is that he's left with these demons. He's left with, and that's all he has. He has that, and he has his memories. And I think that's kind of what I love about this book, even more so. And one of the reasons why I actually look past a lot of, you know, a couple of blemishes there is that King really gets existential here. And it goes even beyond just like faith and hope and yada, yada, yada. It gets into the sort of like id of our own spirits, of just like the stuff that we carry to the end and how long they're going to stay with you. And no matter what you do, no matter who you are, no matter what accomplishments you've done, there's no real atonement, because atonement is really in your own eyes, you know, and it's what you tell yourself. And I think that's what Paul represents towards the end here, is that, someone could tell him like, Janice could tell him he's a good man, and Paul could say he's, and John Coffey could tell him he's a good man. But at the end of the day, he's left in his own solitude with these doubts. And I don't know, I'm rambling, but that's kind of where I got at. Like,
and this idea that atonement isn't easy, which isn't always how King portrays it. I mean, I think in some of his other books, he actually gives the characters very easy forms of salvation. Even someone like Larry Underwood in The Stand is my favorite character from The Stand. Although his journey toward salvation is complex, he does give him a pretty black and white version of absolution by the end of it, right? I mean, he dies, but it's this thing of, okay, you could have gone one way, you went this way, you were a good person, now you did right in the eyes of God. Whereas and it's interesting because King has gone record saying he's not an atheist. I do think King considers himself at least spiritual and definitely believes in an afterlife. But this actually seems like, it almost feels like his most agnostic book, even though there's a character who can heal people whose initials are JC, right? Like, I don't think he gives anyone an easy redemption in this book. And I mean, no one, even the way John Coffey goes out, I mean, no one, even the people who end up living a long and happy life, I mean, none of them really get away scot-free in this, which makes me, maybe is why I don't want to say forgive the race stuff, but maybe the reason I can still appreciate it as a story is because I do think he gets at some complex things in terms of punishment and redemption and all that, but especially in the last pages. I like what you said, Jen, about you don't love the climax, like what happens to Coffey necessarily, but you do like how it's commented on and summed up by the end of it. And I also think he sticks that landing with Paul.
Yeah, I do and I don't, because one of the things that really bothers me about Paul, and I think his central arc, is deciding what to do about what he knows, because his transformation throughout the book is realizing that he should not kill John Coffey, that John Coffey does not deserve death, and then should he do anything about it? Can he do anything about it? And I think what frustrated me so much was, like, he gets long life and he does have to, like, live with the guilt of what he did, and he suffers with this guilt alone. And it's not like he's a vampire where he stays young forever. Like, he's living in this old body that keeps getting old and more painful. And there's a punishment there, but also, like, if I were John Coffey might choose that other than the death that Paul chose for him. And I've got more thoughts about that when we get to John Coffey. But I think the thing that frustrates me the most about Paul is when I look at what allyship is. And it's like, I think we're kind of moving past this, and I'm giving grace because this was written 30 years ago. But like, we don't need allies anymore. I think Feminista Jones said we need co-conspirators, and Paul has the power to be a co-conspirator and to do something, and he chooses not to. And I know that there are 20 factors that stand in his way, but I feel like his choice not to do anything about it and to kill John anyways is understandable, but the way everybody bends to, like, pat him on the back for it and say, oh, it's okay, I feel like lets the audience off the hook and, like, lets them say, okay, it's okay if I don't do anything about this because I'm still a good person.
Yeah, and I think that's honestly where the Magical Negro archetype and trope really falls under the bad spell there, because it at the end, it's Coffey who lets him off the hook.
And that pisses me off so
much.
I
thought that was ridiculous. Like,
I think it ties though to the biblical of, Pontius Pilate being like, I wash my hands of this guy, because even when Jesus was on the cross, he said, forgive them, they know not what they do. And I think that's sort of what Coffey does, is he kind of absolves Paul in his own way of just like, look, this is not on you, but you didn't help, you didn't hinder, you sort of just washed your hands of it.
Right.
Well, and then there's also the whole, like, and this is kind of where King starts getting a little too Nathaniel Hawthorne for my taste, but he gets he's just basically saying, like, oh, there's so much darkness in the world and I just can't handle it, and yada yada yada. Yeah. And it just seems like such an easy out to me. Yeah. Like, and it kind of fulfills the sort of, the boxes that I had addressed already, like with the Magical Negro stereotype, where it's just like, well, okay.
Well, here's something.
There's your conclusion.
Here's something to consider, and I don't know. There's probably not an easy answer for this. And I think, let's say we're transitioning from Paul to John Coffey, just because I think at a certain point you do have to kind of talk about them interconnectedly. what if John Coffey wasn't black in the novel?
That's-
what if he was a white guy? And
I don't think he originally was.
Oh,
Like,
for real?
when he
Oh, that's
originally wrote
interesting.
him. Yeah.
Well, and that
I'll
goes-
have to read On Writing again.
Yeah, no, for sure. Well, and I think that ties back to some of the essays you were sharing, Mike, is that it's not that King was I don't even think he was actively going, oh, this is my race comment. But I think he did make him black because it gave him some plot complications that were convenient just in terms of people not wanting to believe him. But I also believe that if it was a big white, this is where it gets tough. Because yes, of course, it being a black man makes it much harder for people to believe him and not let him get off and all that stuff. At the same time, I wonder if there's a way, if it had been a white guy, I think that still could have been a thing, right? I mean, the guy supposedly raped and killed 2 little girls. I mean, I don't know. I'm not saying King should have made John Coffey white, but I think by making him black, he unknowingly succumbed to the magical Negro stereotype, right? Like, I wonder if we'd be having that conversation if he was white. I don't know. I don't know if any of that makes sense. But
I've been wrestling with this too, and I've been trying to think of like the what ifs here. There are a few of them that I've thought about, and that is one of them. But then again, you wonder, like, what if the roles were reversed? What if Paul was black and John is white?
Yeah.
Is there something? Is that a subversion, or is it then sort of like the white savior or the white? There's a lot of weird conundrums and catch-22s. I feel like with this story, but I think a lot of it does boil down to what you were saying, Caffrey, is that it did make it easier to say, oh, well, this is the 30s, this is the South, he's got to be black, like
Yeah.
And that is and that's an accurate thing, right? I mean, like we said before, I mean, black men getting accused of crimes they didn't commit. I mean, that's a thing today. And it was even more of a thing back then. But,
one of the other essays that I didn't share, and I save it for this very reason, was written by Leroy Moore Jr., and he had an interesting rebuttal against the magical Negro stereotype. He basically said that, and this is what he writes. He goes, "The story of John Coffey is what really happened to many people with developmental disabilities, especially African Americans in the 1930s. Many disabled scholars and historians have established that people with mental disabilities were viewed as deviants and criminals. Poor and people with mental health disabilities back then, especially down south, were out in the streets trying to make a living because with Jim Crow, they didn't have access to schools, jobs, or any other institutions. So they were linked to or seen as waste and someone to be shunned away or locked up. One hot issue was the problem of caring for America's mental retarded population, what they called feeble-minded." And then he references a really interesting piece by Stephen Knoll, who's the author of Feeble-Minded in Our Midst, specifically from 1900 to 1940 in the South. He said, "The South learned from the North about institutionalizing the mentally disabled, but did not look at the striking racial and economic separation in the South that altered the way institutions were established. In the words of Mr. Knoll, as the Southern color line solidified in the first 2 decades of the 20th century, white Southerners ignored the needs and concerns of their black brethren. In a region where spending for social services was low to begin with, money for the care of black feeble-minded individuals just simply was not available. Feeble-minded black people involved in antisocial criminal behavior were often adjudicated through the criminal justice system." So he actually really comes around and supports this because he thinks that there's a disabled representation that's in this movie. I think that I think that's a fair argument. I wouldn't really necessarily muscle my way with that, but it's something to consider. Because it certainly was a truth at the time. I mean, you're seeing it today.
But I mentioned earlier, like, the idea of erasure, and it's this: are you just so afraid to handle this topic that you're just going to act like it never existed?
Exactly.
Right. And I give credit to King for swing for the fences, right? He takes a big swing. You connect sometimes, you don't.
At Fenway Park.
Times. Yeah, exactly. At Fenway
Sitting there in this.
He's like, this would be great. I catch a foul ball and finish my story. And I think too, like, with maybe one thing to change, and I love this. I'm not to give it away, but I think the idea of Paul at the end when he's sort of in the old folks' home, he's become institutionalized, and he's more concerned about telling his story than really processing it himself. I think to him, just sharing his story is enough to sort of absolve him in his mind of his guilt. But yeah, it would have been interesting to hear maybe a little more dissection of him being a little too passive and letting John Coffey die. But then again, also it was Coffey's wish to die, so do you want to stand in his way or not? What
do y'all think about that? Kind of moving into John Coffey, maybe even just separate from the racial things we've talked about already. I keep thinking about this idea that he wants to die. And in many ways, it's an easy way out. But then I'm like, well, no, he's an empath and he absorbs people's pain, and he is in an era, even if this wasn't a Stephen King novel, he is in an era as a black man who would be persecuted and unfairly treated. It's weird because I do buy that psychologically he maybe wouldn't want to be here anymore. But also I recognize that's part of the issue with the book, right? Is that like he's giving him permission. So what do you guys think about that just from like a character standpoint? I mean, do you to you, is that a satisfying resolution to Coffey's storyline, this idea that he just wants to be free of all the pain? Or are you like, no, Paul's wife was right. You should break him out and make sure he has safety somewhere, and it can be an action movie. What do y'all think?
Yeah, this was the biggest problem that I had, and I think it was on this reread. And this is going to make me sound crazy, but I am an empath, and I can't, like, I'm not magical or anything, but like I am
Heal
really
us.
affected.
Where's the vaccine?
I know.
Jen?
You sound crazy.
But like it is really hard to feel the weight of everyone's emotions, and that's something that I've had to create a lot of boundaries around. But I don't want to die because of it, you know. So I was reading that, and I was like, yeah, but it really, this is the thing in the book. One of the two things that really frustrated me more than anything else, because I feel like John Coffey does not do a single thing in the book for himself. All he does is help other people. And like, yes, he saves Melly and he saves Mr. Jingles, but like what he really does is gives Paul this like feigned salvation of like allowing himself to still be a good person in his own eyes, and like giving him this out. And I just found it so frustrating that came from Coffey himself, because I don't think Paul really had to struggle
to arrive at those conclusions. Like,
yeah. Or I mean, and it does weigh on him, and because I mean, 90 years later he's still writing this book, but like he always has that out. He has that, well, John Coffey wanted this, instead of I had to make this choice. Was it the right choice, you know?
I think it would have been a stronger ending, and it would have really hammered on the guilt if he didn't have that out, you know?
Yeah.
And it just doesn't really, it's King pulling the punches, because at that point it's actually King really just admitting his own guilt, because he doesn't want to actually have to write this.
Right. Yeah.
No.
It would be interesting if like John's like, please boss, break me out, and they don't.
Right.
And he has to let me seriously. Like that's
but I think he's just tired, and we bring up like obviously he has some kind of shine ability, right? And Stevie, like, he's not only can he read minds and emotions, but he can also literally, you know, pull a tumor out of you. So he's got telepathic and telekinesis, telepath.
Yeah, telepathy, telekinesis, and he.
But I think he's just I think he's tired though, and you know, what if they did break him out? Where's he gonna hide? He's never gonna fit in this world, right? He's always gonna be absorbing others' pain, and it just seems like, he's just tired by the end of the novel, and I think it's in a weird way a mercy that they do kill him.
Yeah, because to King's credit, he does. I mean, King does this thing all the time where he literally like does the what if of every situation. I mean, that's the whole point of that discussion when, you know, the men are at Paul's house.
Oh, that scene drove me crazy, because I was like, no, like, listen to Paul's wife, to Jan,
yes.
Come on, but
Caffrey's like, listen to Percy. Percy's my favorite.
Great guy. Excited to get
But the one thing that I would say kind of distinguishes this from the traditional Magical Negro archetype is the sense that he does get his revenge. I mean, he literally has Percy kill Wharton, who at that point Coffey knows who Wharton is. And, you know, so it kind of goes into what there's a great quote from Spike Lee about this is hilarious, but this quote about the Magical Negro, and especially tied to the Legend of Bagger Vance. He goes, you know, blacks are getting lynched left and right, and Bagger Vance is more concerned about improving Matt Damon's golf swing.
Man,
I got to sit down. I get mad just thinking about it. They're still doing the same old thing, recycling the noble savage and the happy slave. He went on to discuss his desire to create films showing black people doing all kinds of things. And the thing here is that, like, Coffey does take some sort of agency, and it kind of goes against the morals that the book is trying to possibly
he gets
present.
Revenge. It's weird, because theoretically, once they know that, especially with the evidence that Paul is gathering, there's a case for keeping Wharton alive, right? Like, that could be Coffey's out, but instead Coffey just goes for pure visceral revenge. Like once he knows, he's like, fuck it, this guy's dying. And not only that, I'm gonna mentally incapacitate this other asshole who's on the Green Mile. Well, I don't know. So for you guys, is that a moment of like, is that satisfying or is that tragic to you? Because that also is what prevents Coffey from being alive at the end in a way.
No, but I think Coffey too has no faith in the justice system, right? He's going to be executed for something he did not do. So the idea that he could somehow
change it,
turn state's witness, it's like, no, I think this is a more true form of justice, is him killing off the guy that actually committed the crime, because he would get no satisfaction.
Well,
any other way.
Because on a meta level, Coffey is just supposed to represent the fallibility of the system, and so it's like it's like he has to die, because otherwise the theme doesn't work, which is, again, falls into one of the conundrum that we've been discussing about. And
that's the problem with analyzing any of Coffey's actions in this book, is that he's just not a developed character at all. And like when you were talking about, if he had said, no, let me out, there's no way he could have escaped, because he's been written as so dumb and so helpless, and he's been so infantilized that he's barely a character outside of what he does to help everybody else. And so like, I don't see a way that we could have changed his narrative that would work with the story, because he fundamentally is so bare. He just exists as a plot device, and I think when I think about him getting revenge, because that really is the only thing he does with any kind of agency.
Everything else is reactive.
Exactly. And I think you're right. I think part of it represents the fallibility of the system, but I also think it's interesting to see Stephen King's religious views kind of start to come out. And I think you see that a lot in Desperation. But here, I don't know what his beliefs are, but I know his daughter is a Unitarian Universalist minister. And I went to a UU church for a while, and my pastor there knew his daughter, and I like lost my mind when he told me that. But it's like Unitarian Universalism is very accepting of all. Like when I went to that church, we celebrated Christmas, but we also celebrated Hanukkah, and we celebrated solstice, and we did kind of honoring everything, not really subscribing to anything. And so when I look at him, when I look at the religion here, and there's a quote later on when he says God doesn't care, I feel like it's a really kind of cold analytical look at religion and this Christ figure of like, sometimes the justice is unchrist-like as defined by major religions,
Yeah, and the whole like lack of definition is so rampant in this book. I mean, any time they get a chance to have some sort of background or some sort of story, King just kind of leans on the sort of vague archetype. Like they ask, like at one point that, was it on page 379 of the pocketbook edition, Melly asks, who are you? And why do you have so many scars on your hands and arms? Who hurt you so badly? And he like literally just says like, I don't hardly remember where they all come from, ma'am. And then like early on like page 307, they ask like, why? Coffey doesn't even know her. And then Paul's just like, because it's what he does. It's what God made him for. And it's just, these are such easy outs, And it's like, and then I'm not going to expect like John Coffey to be like, well, actually these scars are from, yada, yada, yada. like while he's talking to Melly, who's just coming too.
He's like, have you ever heard of the Crimson King? He just
He's like, hey, Paul, you want to know how I got these scars?
How you want to know?
No, but one thing I wanted to compare to like the idea of like Beowulf. I know Caffrey's a fan, but the story Grendel that came out, which was from the perspective of the creature that's just only, referenced as sort of the villain. Not that King would write from John Coffey's perspective, but I think it would be kind of interesting to have somebody else write, John Coffey's first person point of view in his life.
Yeah, like Maleficent.
Because it is kind of, I mean, I wonder too, okay, we keep trying to think of these different ways that this could be a more satisfying story, at least Coffey's arc. And something, okay, but like, yeah, obviously if you made him a white man, that changes a lot of things. But I do wonder if they just took away that memory thing, that would make him a lot more developed, right? And like, I don't know, I think I maybe am a little bit more satisfied by him as a character than some of y'all are. But the memory thing does feel like a little bit of a cheat, Like you can still make him quiet and persecuted and all the rest of it without having him literally forget everything that happens to him, like pretty much as soon as it happens, right? Like he doesn't remember anything, and it seems like an easy plot device. And like you were saying, Jen, it does serve to like infantilize him a lot more than King probably should.
Yeah.
We should
think
just.
he-
Sorry, go ahead, Jen.
I was gonna say he could have become friends with Del. Like if we could see conversations between the two
I
of
kind of wish
them.
that would have been great. And it's funny because
Yeah.
I feel like I sort of remembered them doing that, but then they don't really, aside from the Mr. Jingles and.
Yeah.
You see, I think they have a mutual respect for each other in a way, but yeah, it would be interesting if we actually saw we're privy to some of their
Again,
conversations.
though, the problem is this is a point of view. You know,
Yeah.
like it's all in Paul's point of view. I mean, they could have gone
That's
all
true.
full
It
on.
could have happened.
It could have been like Dexter, where we just have everyone's point of view, even though it's still funneled through the point of view of one character. But
Yeah.
there's
Yeah.
that
Michael
would
C.
be.
Hall's hot though, so I forgive it.
That is true. He's omniscient also in the show. So he's able to see when
I like
Dokes is
Lumberjack, Michael C. Hall.
wandering around and everything. But no, my yeah, I mean, again, he had an opportunity here to create some really cool, interesting subversion of the the Magical Negro trope, and it really would have worked in hindsight if they they tweaked some things here and there, and it would have also been pretty awesome to have had in King's bibliography after 2 or 3 decades. I guess it's only been at that point 2 decades of leaning on that.
Yeah. But I mean, the problem is, like you were saying before, I don't think King was aware that he was doing it, right?
No, I don't think so
and that's
either.
the issue. And once, like Pfleegor is saying, I don't know if any of us would be better equipped to tell this story. I mean, it's hard, and
Right.
and we're all white people. Like we have our blind spots. I've certainly done that in plays I've written where I have characters of color who, looking back, I'm like, ooh, I could have done better on that, And so it's tough. But I think to subvert it, you really have to be aware that you're playing with that, right? And that you're purposely depicting that, and that's the rub, right? Because like to do it in the first place, you probably wouldn't have to be aware of it as a white person.
Right.
I feel like
keep in mind too, he probably wrote this when George Bush was in office, Bill Clinton. Like, think of
that was Clinton years, I think, right?
It was the Clinton years.
Well,
yeah.
I mean, this one's published, but he's probably been writing this, late 80s, early 90s.
No. Because the thing is
he started writing it when
it was like right around the mid 90s. He came up with the idea. It was like, well, we got this idea. I got to put it to paper, and so this was like. It's one of the weird instances where it really was organic. Like it was happening as it was kind of publishing in a way, like it was. So there's.
Well, then I'll take that back. But he always throws me off because I just assume an author is sitting on an idea for 10 years.
And sometimes he is too,
George
right?
R. Martin
Yeah.
school here, Game of Thrones. But yeah, I guess King, he's so prolific and his turnaround is so quick that you're right. He could literally start a book, finish it, get it published in like a year.
I always wonder actually, because at the end he always does the thing at the end of the book. Here, actually no, we can actually see because he always puts at the very end exactly when he started the book and when he finished it. Oh no, he didn't this time though. Weird. Hold on. Oh man, usually he just put April 20th, 1996, which is when he finished it. But usually he puts like the time it took him to write it, and I never know how the timeline works.
Wait a second.
Yeah,
it says.
Oh.
1932
to
1993. Oh my God. No.
But and so it's just funny when you read some of his books. You're like, oh, he spent 5 years writing that, but wait, he was also spending 5 years writing this novel. So you never know how it.
So in the foreword, it says, I don't know how much I trusted this, October 27th, 1995. It says that in the foreword in the first edition. In the very last page, it says April 28, 1996.
Man, so he really did crank this out. It's like a month per volume. That's crazy.
The length of the O.J. Simpson trial, and it's like happening concurrently.
Yeah, I mean,
and I want to say for the record too, because I worry people are going to get mad at me. I still absolutely love Stephen King. I feel like I'm coming down
100%.
kind of hard on
Yeah.
him. Like aside from the people I've actually met, he's probably my favorite person on the planet, and I think there's so much good in this book. But we have to talk about this stuff because that's how we grow and that's how we understand the subtle stuff, and that's how we get better and we don't do it again.
And I also just think it's a boring podcast if all we do is rave about every single thing he does. Right? I mean,
that's true.
Or only talk about this stuff that is infallible.
This guy is just he's
10 out of 10.
He's just a machine.
Awesome.
He's handsome.
I
He's
love
a machine. No, we do have a lot of more characters to get through, and I'm sure both Paul and John will come up as because everyone is literally in direct relation to them. The next I have on my list, and I probably don't have to spend as much time on him, is Brutal Hal, who played by the great David Moore. I feel like I'm talking about the movie too much, but
I think it's
hard,
fair
it's
because
hard to
it's hard
separate.
not to.
But Brutal is more or less the sidekick straight man in this. I mean, it's funny because I don't have anything particularly deep to say about him, but I do think he's I don't know, I did think about just like coworkers I've had in the past who maybe I don't know them super well outside of work, but I also really like working with them, just kind of being a trusty person. But I don't know, does anyone have anything especially revelatory to share about Brutal?
I thought his name was a little too on the nose, like I mentioned. Not only just for being called Brutal, which I don't know how anyone would be able to say that name, but without just thinking of I don't know, an asshole. But like,
like a Rob Zombie
dickhead
movie.
name.
Brutal.
Yeah, right.
I think Brutal is
Brutal. Go bring him out there.
Like I feel like people use that as a positive adjective to describe horror movies now, and it kind of annoys me because and about movies I like too, but I feel like the sort of the bar that's been set now is like, is it brutal? Like when Halloween Kills came out, all the positive tweets were like, oh, it is brutal. I'm like, who gives a shit? Like, I don't, because when I think of the original Halloween, I don't think I'm not like, oh man, that's fucking brutal. I love it. Like, anyway, that's a side point.
It's also on the nose because Brutus, like the Caesar and
too.
Yeah, exactly.
I feel like usually you have like, it's like calling the linebacker on the football team tiny. Like, I feel like that's what King is trying to do, but here's the problem. The joke is that, okay, well, his name is Brutus. We're going to call him brutal because he's actually not brutal because he's gentle, but also he is huge and he can be really dangerous when he wants to. So then it's
he was a former football player.
Yeah,
so
it's like LSU.
It just feels weird, yeah.
I think he, in a way, though, kind of inoculated Paul to Coffey not to be intimidated by him because he's noted as a big guy. He's physically imposing, but he's actually so calm and soft spoken, and I think those are qualities that he also shares with John Coffey.
He's like Bane.
Yeah.
I do like something I do like a little is what later on when Paul picks up some telepathic abilities of his own from John Coffey. Yeah. I like when he gets to go inside Brutal's head and hear him struggling with language and syntax. I mean, I guess what I'm saying is I don't think Brutal has, outside what you were saying, Pfleegor, I don't think he has as much of a huge function beyond plot mechanics in the book like some of the other characters do. But I also do believe him as he seems like a believably sketched out corrections officer, right? Are we? Yeah. They are a corrections officer, right? Are they called something else if they're on death row?
Prison guard, CO.
Pfleegor, get your dad on the phone. Get your dad on the horn. We need to
ring. Hey, Dad, what was the name of your career for 40 years?
Danny, as a corrections officer.
Well, on the opposite end of
Brutus, Dad?
Of Brutal. Wait, what did you say? What did you say, Pfleegor?
I said, what do you think of Brutus, Dad?
He turned on Caesar?
I was going to say on the opposite end of Brutus, both in Brutal, both in stature and demeanor and just characterization, we have Percy Wetmore, who maybe we'll have a little bit more to say. And am I wrong in saying one of the most effectively despicable characters in Stephen King's?
100%.
I hate him, and in a good way. I hate him. He is just... Yeah. And it's
he and Big Jim Rennie are like the two.
Oh yeah,
they're really hate
characters you love to hate. It's funny because I know we just came off of Rose Madder, and not long before that we had Dolores Claiborne, and we've been talking about King villains or characters who they're almost too awful because we have to believe that people like them in a weird way, especially in these codependent abusive relationships. So I feel like it's not successful with characters like them, but with Percy, it's great because from the get-go, he's the guy that you have to hate, and he is, oh man, he is such a twerp and just being the governor's relative and all that, and also just this, we talk a lot about how King is really good at portraying bullies, which he is, but I feel like Percy is in a different class than someone like Henry Bowers. Percy is almost like he's not even effective enough to be a bully, which there's something so sad and pathetic.
Oh, he's a phony.
He's such a phony.
Yeah. The only way he can be a bully is when the odds are all stacked in his favor because the person is literally like in a prison.
Hey, it sounds like someone else I know.
I mean, look, I was reading this and I loved how he's characterized. Like there's a lot of, he's so insecure and he so uses his connections and it's just so despicable, but he plays the victim so much. And two of my favorite parts are when he finally gets confronted with that and they're like, no, we know people too, they don't have connections, but they'll beat the shit out of you, and I think seeing that knowledge on his face is really, really satisfying, because I feel like I see a lot of people like Percy that are just, I'm never going to see that with them, you know?
Yeah, and just even the way too, he's always trying to keep himself perfectly coiffed. It's this idea of someone who is so unhinged and unput together and insecure, trying so hard to look like they have it all together to the outside world, and he never can, no matter what he does. Even when, just from the little details of them catching him with the Popeye Tijuana Bible.
Yeah.
I looked. It's funny because in the I think it might be in the serial versions too, but in the single volume edition, the King talks in the beginning about how he just made up the Popeye Tijuana Bible, and then it actually does exist, and it's Rule 37 or whatever it is, right? Like I looked up on the internet.
Rule 34.
34. Yeah, I totally
made
found
it up.
If you Google it, you can. If you want to see who's it? Winky. Who's the hamburger guy? Winky or whatever the fuck?
Wimpy.
Wimpy. Yeah, you want to see
not know
Wimpy?
Popeye Caffrey? What
I mean, a
is
little
going
bit.
on?
I know. I like that ride at Universal a lot. Bluto's build.
I hope we
Apparently
get
you
some
did not
water.
pay attention.
Yeah.
I hope we get some Rule 34 of Percy and Wharton. That'd be. I'm just joking.
No, it's tease there.
God.
No, but I think Percy too, though. It's he's not the boss's kid, but it's that trope, right? Of like he's got family connections. I always, when I watched this, reread it actually, in the movie Casino, the character that Joe Bob
Yes.
Yeah, he's totally
where
like
he's like the nephew, and even his uncle is like, oh, he's the stupidest son of a bitch, but if you gave him a job, I would consider it a personal favor. And you got to imagine anyone that's come in Percy's path, whether they're his relative or just a coworker, they got to know that he's kind of an idiot.
Yeah.
Kind of
One
an
of
asshole.
my favorite descriptions of him is on page 120 in the pocket books, and it's like, you want to know something else, Paul? I don't understand him. And they're talking about Percy. He's got connections. I understand that, all right. But why would he use them to get a job on the Green fucking Mile? Anywhere in the state pen, for that matter. Why not as a page in the state senate? Or the guy who makes the lieutenant governor's appointments? Surely his people could have gotten him something better if he had asked them. So why here? I shook my head. I didn't know. There were a lot of things I didn't know then. I suppose I was naive. But that really does it's a good summary of what we've just been discussing about Percy, in that he's a phony because he knows that if you get something a little too highbrow, he's never going to be able to meet the ends meets there. Like he's going to be seen, and he's already seen here in the dregs of the legal system, and it's so. And it's so telling because, like what you were saying, Caffrey, with like the way he slicks back his hair, that's like him. That's his poker face, basically, and it's the most revealing, transparent poker face because it shows how insecure he is. And I don't know. Percy's just an interesting character, and I know Randall probably would have had like 3 hours talking about Percy because he loves talking about the dickheads
bullies,
in King's
yeah.
Dominion, but. He's just so interesting, and I love that he gets the just desserts here are just one of the best fates for a villain in and even beyond King's Dominion. It's just such a great fucking fate for him.
Yeah. Well, and the interesting thing about Percy, I think that I sometimes forget because he's such a little twerp, is that like part of the reason he takes that job is because he wants to kill someone.
Yes.
He just wants to experience it, you know? And I think that there's like a lot of like psychopathy in him that is really fascinating to pull apart. Like he doesn't give a shit. Like he just wants to kill Del because he's less powerful and he wants to experience that power. And I guess like Little Man's Disease kept coming to my mind when I was reading him. Like he just feels like he feels so entitled to more than what he has, and so he has to take all of that feeling out on someone who has less power than him, so he remembers that he still has some kind of power. I think my favorite description of Percy is in part 4, page 64, and it's with the emergency warden, whose name I can't remember, and it's after Edward Delacroix's death, and he turns to him and he says, "You're a little asshole, and I don't like you one bit."
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
He's almost like Percy's almost like Eric Cartman, but not funny. Like
Yes.
Cartman's like
Yeah.
Cartman's really funny and in a weird way charismatic because of it, but Percy is just like and. I mean, it really is a testament to King's. We're joking about Randall like always loving the bullies, but it's true. King gets a lot of mileage out of his bullies, and I like that he doesn't write them all the same way. You have someone like Henry Bowers who is sort of the antithesis to the stereotype about the bully of, oh well, they're just like an insecure person. It's like, no, Bowers is just like evil. Like Bowers is just like cold and evil, and then you have someone like Percy, and you're like, oh no, this all is coming from a place of insecurity and nervousness and never feeling like you're living up to anything.
One of the things I love about Percy too is what his thematic implications entail. Is that, and this is something I've really been thinking a lot, and I know you have too, Caffrey, because we talk about it all the times on our, I don't know, dozen text threads that we have. But it's the idea that like scum rises to the top, and we've seen it. And I don't give a shit at this point if we get political in here or whatever. But we've seen it in Trump's America. We've seen a bunch of like despicable. We've seen like despicable scumbags that just get away, and the assholes always do get away, or most of the time do. And we see it with Percy being able to not even have any real consequences for his actions, with the exception of what coffee gives him. And then we also see it with the echo with Brad Dolan. Because we see like these people are just going to continue to exist throughout time. Like society is always going to have a Brad Dolan, which kind of a Brad Dolan or a Percy Whitmore, which is one of the reasons why it kind of works when you talk about, when Coffee talks about there's so much darkness in the world, and I like that cynical look at it. Like I don't think, I think narratively for Coffee it's an easy out, but thematically I love it as a cynic, because I think this world is fucking shit, and as the cynical outlook in me is always just going to say that the scum, as I said before, the scum is always going to rise to the top, and we just have to sit there and just fucking shake our heads at it. And
I always think of the idea too of like, this is why we can't have nice things.
Yes,
Like, you'll hear about like a hippie commune, and you're like, oh, everyone raises each other's kids, and everyone and then you're like, yeah, but all it takes is one fucked up person to kind of one bad apple,
to pour the Kool-Aid, and then everyone's
dead. It's just like but yeah, I think that is a good point though. King does, what's that quote about, like, happy families are all the same?
Oh, it's a Sopranos episode. All happy families.
But unhappy families are each unhappy for their own reasons. Yeah. But I think a bully is a bully for its own reasons, right? Each bully is going to be unique, and whether they're taking back their power or even if they're not comprehensible, like their motives and why they're doing things, we all hate a bully. Everyone does, and I'm sure even bullies think they're bullied, right?
Yeah. Oh, totally. I think I'm glad that y'all brought up.
Hey, Caffrey, you twerp! Shut up and give me your money.
You pipsqueak. There's a
wallet inspector.
I was just reading. There's this whole. We were sharing the actor Alan Covert, who's in a lot of Adam Sandler movies and co-writes him. I was going on a deep Twitter dive because he's this Trumper, and he's in a feud with this other comedian who insists that Alan Covert bullied him and slammed him against a wall, and they got into this argument about what bullies were, and this guy started taking martial arts so he could fight Alan anyway.
God.
It's like very depressing when you read it, but but I'm glad y'all brought up Brad Dolan, because it's where he feels different than Percy to me a little bit, but I think that's just because he is in a less extreme institution. Like, I think because Percy is
the stakes are less.
Exactly. Yeah, because Percy's on death row, he feels like he has to throw his weight around even more, and the consequences of what he does are a lot more horrible. Because when I first read it, I'm like, oh, Brad's just kind of like an asshole. But I'm like, no, I think he really is the same as Percy. He's just in a place where it doesn't require him to go to such extremes. Speaking of it, sorry, what were you gonna say, Jen?
I was going to say, he's also, 70 years later, so I feel like Percy is, the Percy version that would live in
the
this,
30s,
exactly,
in
this,
Depression.
worldview of, a man is this and blah, blah, blah. But what I love about Percy, and I think the way he gets his desserts, is because of his own incompetence. And it's, basically all of the consequences that he suffers are because he fucks up. You know? Whereas that's frustrating, but it also kind of gives me hope. It's when you feel so powerless, just that hubris is still always going to be there.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, even, because you could argue, I mean, even though they lock him in the storage room or whatever else when they go to take coffee to the warden, everything is of Percy's own design, right? Like, if he wasn't an asshole to Dell, if he didn't do what he does to Dell during the bad death of Edward Delacroix, Coffee would not have had those feelings toward him.
Right.
I love the idea that, I kept imagining Brad Dolan as Ben Stiller's character from, Happy Gilmore. It's just
you're in my world, Coffee.
Happy Gilmore and Hubie Halloween. He makes a return in the very first moments of Hubie Halloween.
Read this line. It's just it's just if you tell anyone I squeezed your old little wrist, Polly, I'll tell them that you're having delusions, onset of senile dementia, likely. And you know what? They'll believe me. If there are bruises, they'll think you made them yourself. And it's just like it's my fingers hurt, and it's like, well, now your back's gonna hurt because you just got land duty or lawn duty or whatever.
Have you seen the deleted scene where he's making do like a phone sex operation, and then the grandmother gets taken out and he has to take over, and he's like, ooh, I love my favorite line is the now you will go to sleep, or I will put you to sleep.
Or I will put you to sleep.
Check out the name tag. You're in
my world now, Grandma.
So funny. Yeah. Well, let's move on to someone who's very tied up in Percy's fate. Obviously, is William Wild Bill Wharton, not Billy the Kid. Wild Bill. Yeah. Once again, another horrible scumbag in a way that's much different than Percy. And Grant King is writing he's writing a book about death row, so there's going to be a lot of not villains maybe, but unsavory sorts in this novel. But once again, I am very impressed by how Wharton is almost complete ego, and just it would be easy for him to seem like Percy, but I think because Wharton is just so, it's weird. I was going to say he just doesn't give a shit about anything, but they also show that there is a weird level of intelligence there in terms of how he's able to manipulate people by faking seizures and faking being more of an imbecile than he actually is. But yeah, what are people's thoughts on Wild Bill Wharton?
It's like the self-survival intuitiveness, like that kind of intelligence rather than like planning out everything. And one of the most chilling lines I think in the entire book for me is when the warden writes on the form, like, this man just doesn't care. And I feel like he's such like a deadly, terrifying wild card to me. And that's from somebody he's in a cell for almost the entire book. So like he is contained and we know that he's only so much of a threat, but he's so off-putting and disgusting.
Yeah, he's just gross too. Like
I think he's probably been institutionalized his whole life.
Yeah, and he's young too. In the book, he's only like 19 or 20, right?
Yeah, but you can imagine that he probably spent 12 of those years in some sort of confinement. I can't separate the image of Sam Rockwell.
Me either.
In my mind. I just think he nails that character. And I think we're all Stella fans, and every time Sam Rockwell shows off, it's a similar kind of character of just this like chaotic. Like can fly off at any moment.
The line, the line I think of is when it's funny too because, I'm gonna feel weird saying this because he's also a rapist and a murderer. But you ever had the kid when in middle school or even high school who is awful, and they're an awful person and they always act up, but every now and then they'll say something that's really funny to the teacher, and like with
that was we called him Dan Caffrey in my high school.
That was me. I was a real Will Wharton now, but I think of the moment where it's disgusting, like where he pisses on them, and then he it's such an awful line, and he's such an awful person, but he's like oh, I'll work on cooking up some turds for you, come back tomorrow, and it's like it's so foul and gross, and he's such a foul, gross person, but that's also kind of a funny thing to say.
Well, they admit that. I think that Paul at one point says like he's basically says as much, like
he's kind
this
of
guy's
funny,
an awful person, but goddamn is he clever, especially like when he's making that dumb fucking song about Dell.
Oh yeah, like, barbecue.
Yeah,
it's awful. Yeah. But maybe it's because like Pfleegor saying, I think of Sam Rockwell, who I think is really fucking funny just anyway, and like and because he is like the mustache salesman on Stella. But he's doing that voice. He's doing the all right, like the kind of southern kind of not, and like.
But it's interesting to think too, though, like in the history of Paul working the Green Mile, because you occasionally do get a Wild Bill. And just how that changes the dynamic of the workplace, right? Yeah. Just by having this one guy who is a disruptor,
even amongst really other murderers, it changes the dynamic. Yeah.
But like, think if he wasn't there, like you go to work, check in, John Coffey says keep the light on, you go home. It's not a big deal. But when you have someone like Wild Bill, it's just this like chaotic evil that just messes everyone up.
He's the kid.
It knows how to throw in that funny line to like catch you off guard, because I think that's part of like his MO too, is to be kind of what you want him to be, so you don't know what he's really doing, and to try to like pass in plain sight, and it's just it's interesting to see him try to do all of this stuff when he has so little power, but to see what kind of power he actually does just by the strength of his personality,
Well, and also too, he goes out so unceremoniously for all the lead up, and the fact that he was essentially responsible for John, or partly responsible for John Coffey getting arrested. He committed the crime that John Coffey was convicted of. He goes out in a really depressing way that is, once again, is kind of satisfying. Like, I think the way he would want to go out is guns a-blazing, robbing a bank, escaping from prison, whatever. But instead, it's like he's asleep and Percy walks by and just offs him, you know?
Can I mention just with that, like, okay, so you give the brain tumor bugs to Percy. Does that mean John Coffey still mentally controls him? Or Percy of his own volition decides?
I think it was like more just like not even necessarily like a brain tumor specifically, but I think it was just like rottenness in him, you know. And so I think maybe it would affect a different Yeah, I don't know, like because that's a good.
I don't know. I'm just trying to think how attenuated.
Well, what do we make of those insects? Because that's something I was wondering. Is like, is it just darkness? Is it?
I mean, because you have to think the
pestilence,
the stuff.
That's
from,
what I thought biblically.
The stuff from Paul looks the same as the stuff from Melinda. Even though it's a different sickness and a different severity of sickness, I feel like it's just kind of just the decay within human beings, right? And so I think for me, I didn't necessarily interpret it that, John Coffey's controlling him, or even that, like, it's like a brain tumor that's slowly eating away at Percy. I just picture it as like, it's just like a whole lot of bad stuff to be taking at one point. And within a few seconds.
But I think the fact that he kills the guy that literally killed the two girls, right?
Yeah.
John Coffey had to have some.
I thought that too.
He's down with the sickness.
Oh yeah, John Coffey knows what he's doing, but I don't think I don't know if he's like. Well, no, that's a good point. Yeah, I don't know. Is he?
It didn't. I mean, he could have just as easily given that to Paul. You know, like there's something about him giving the justice. I don't know. It's.
Well, that's what I was saying before. It's like this is
how
like,
attenuated is it that you can still control? If I get a brain tumor and I suck it out, how long can I hold it in before I can make someone do my bidding?
Well, I think it was more methodical. You know, I think if we're going to look at, and then you could bring in this character, Melinda, in the sense that, you know, at one point, Paul, in one of the King admissions that I was discussing before, talks about how, like, you know, I'm not saying it was possession, but it felt like there was a demon inside Melinda. And just based on the stuff that she's saying and the venom and vitriol, I think it was Coffey being methodical in the saying, like, all right, well, we take out that negativity, we take out that the stuff that's causing her to be so venomous and vitriolic, and give it to Percy, who would certainly go off on Percy. I mean, not Percy, but Wharton, because he hated him. So it's like he knew that, like, if we give this sort of venom and vitriol, it's going to be just enough to send Percy over the edge to get revenge on the person that he wants to get revenge on. So it's almost like dominoes lining up.
Well, because the only other person,
he hates everyone though. He hates Paul too.
Yeah, I mean,
but I feel like Percy, in terms of like power rankings of who he hated, it was probably Dell first, who's dead by that point, and then Wharton because of I think the reason he hates Wharton so much is because of the attack when they first get to prison, but also the sexual stuff he says to Percy too. Like, and I don't know,
because he's homophobic. I mean, and that, So I mean,
I've kind of always read it as, and I really hadn't thought too deeply into it until we started talking about it now, but like that he takes this darkness out of Melinda, and it is in the form of a tumor in her, but then by being in him, part of him like purifies it and like directs it a little more. And I don't know how much he actually, like, Jan says he used this as a gun against Wharton, which I think might be giving him a little too much credit, but I think especially considering how he's written, but it's like he's channeling that direction, and it's coming from whatever gives him his power to direct this power that he's taken into himself.
And I am glad
like
that we don't get
Brita filter.
I'm glad that we don't get like the full. What do you say, Pfleegor?
They say he's like a Brita filter.
Yeah.
Or he's like filter. Hey man, nice shot.
Oh god, he's like Richard Matthew Patrick's filter. Well, I am glad in this book, because I think as King's gotten older, especially, he really bends himself into pretzel knots trying to explain away some of these metaphysical things, right? Like in Dr. Sleep.
Agree.
And I like that we're left to debate this, right? Rather than, it's this energy vampire bullshit thing that he started
He's
doing.
like, this much tumor turns into this much power. I agree. I don't really want an answer to that. It's something.
No, it's a cool, and
I threw the book across the room and was like, this is bullshit.
And
but it also ties into one of the things that I guess I would put this more in misery than anything, but I do think that it's what I always say with King's inferences, right? Like if he suggests something, if he puts the idea out in the room, it's traditionally that idea. It's like, there was the closet door was open ajar, and I could sense something is inside. Well, if you're in King's Dominion, probably is something inside that closet. And the same thing with, like, when you bring up the idea of possession with Melinda. I'm not saying that's the case, but like King, it certainly affords King the idea of having Mellie saying the most ludicrous shit that I don't even think anyone really would say if they had a tumor in their head.
No.
I mean, it gets a little over the top.
It's we'll some pound cake when we get
so. But it's like you know, given his demonstrations and meditations on good and evil in this book, it does make you think. Like, well, you know, what is the line of science and religion that's in faith that's taking place here? Like, are we supposed to believe like that this concept of the insects and of that darkness isn't so much, it manifests itself as an ailment, but in at its roots is a more eternal force? Because you get to that again. He suggests as much when he gets in, and again, I'll bring this up a little bit more in King's Dominion because I think it has ties to 1122. But like the idea that like this force that's opposing Paul and them from being able to do what they can with Mellie, and then John Coffey comes in, who's another force who basically turns that force away. So you can make the argument that like whatever blackness or darkness that Coffey takes out of people has far less to do with their ailments and more to do with whatever we want to consider evil or darkness in this. Does that make any sense? Sorry, I'm mumbling on this.
No, I think it makes total sense.
Does.
Being
and I was thinking kind of as in terms of insomnia when they talk about purpose and the random, you know, and is a sickness something that Mellie got, or is it something that was like inflicted upon her? And just it brings up a lot of really interesting questions about what illness and fate and death actually are, and how much and how that plays into like the afterlife and religion, which
because
is interesting.
Because you look at the Bible and a lot of Baptist parables, and you know, things like lightning are considered God's wrath, and you know, things like you know, the blindness or leprosy were considered, you know, sins, and and so it's, I don't know, that there was something that came to mind when I was reading this, and that I wondered if that was something that King was trying to maybe not be explicit about, but again, maybe be subtle or suggest. But I don't know. It's one read to go at it, I guess. Well,
we have some other prisoners to talk about, and now we're on to someone who is much different, but also not a great guy, I don't think, is Edouard. Are you guys saying Delacroix or Delacroix? I say Delacroix, but do you say LaCroix soda or Delacroix?
Vous parlez-vous en français?
Edouard Delacroix.
Well,
Michael,
I think my audiobook said Delacroix.
Michael Jeter in the movie does a really good Cajun accent too, I think. But so it's interesting because I don't think they get into this in the film, although I could be wrong. But when we really learn the details about what Edouard Delacroix did to get him there, you're like, oh man, that's horrible. But I also do like that passage that Paul Edgecombe has about a lot of these men, by the time they get here, the thing that element of them is gone, just because. And I don't. It's weird. I don't necessarily think that's a sympathetic thing, but just this idea that they're. I mean, I get the idea that Edouard Delacroix's life has just been kind of miserable on all fronts. You know, I mean, he's just he's weirdly pathetic, which is why I think his status upgrade with Mr. Jingles is maybe a nice last minute reprieve for him to get in his lowly life. But I don't know. I was kind of impressed by how much I like Edouard Delacroix throughout, but then also when I think about it, oh no, he's kind of miserable and pathetic. And I actually think King doesn't lose sight of how miserable and pathetic he is too. But what was it? What everyone else think about our favorite little Frenchman?
Yeah, it's hard for me not to see Mr. Noodle when I read this, also from Sesame Street. That's who plays him. But
that's right. R.I.P. Michael Jeter. Yeah, he's I think is he in City of Lost Children also? I don't know, but I can't remember.
He's in Jurassic Park 3.
Is he? Oh, that's right.
Yeah, he's great.
Yeah, so one of the things that really struck me on this reread of the book is like how there's so much harshness underneath it. And I think I connect it so strongly to Tom Hanks, and I think the movie came out around Christmas, that like I think in an older episode I called it heartwarming, because it just has that kind of soothing quality to it. But this is a harsh book, and there's a lot of really ugly things that happen and are described.
I mean, he's a rapist and a multiple murderer. I mean,
and he is not the only time that is mentioned. Like the word rape is all over this book. Like even when he goes to visit Hammersmith, he is on leave from a rape trial, and there's no reason to put that in. And I'm not saying I'm not passing judgment on that. I'm just saying there's so much harshness here, and I feel like it's really interesting to you skim over that because of the good that you see in the book, and I just forget about that. And I think you're right. It's really easy to like Del because of the way he is with Mr. Jingles and just kind of how pathetic he's presented, and because we hate Percy so much that like he's like the underdog in that situation. But yeah, I mean, when he dies, like I don't think it is deserved what happens to him, but like that's a terrible thing that he did, and I do like that King kind of reckons with that. But I think that's kind of the seed of what I see throughout the book.
When I think, sorry, go ahead, Mike,
you kind of mentioned it again, Caffrey, that an extension of that idea of the good versus evil, in the sense like whatever was there is gone. And that's such a Catholic Christian element. It's one of the components of forgiveness, in that the idea that you've been, you let the demons get you, and the demons made you had these actions, and you had to, you could be forgiven by expelling these ideas and these demons. And I kind of took an umbrage about it with the idea that they suggest that like, oh, what was in him is gone. It's like, okay, well, probably not, because if he was out and he was doing, we've seen it so many times in the past where like, there are repeat offenses, and like, but at the same time, one thing I do like is the idea that we as a society have forgotten, especially nowadays, is that, there should be room for forgiveness, there should be room, but obviously in this case, it's hard. I mean, he's a fucking child killer. So it's like, it's a very tricky area, but that idea of something that was in him is gone. It's so biblical. It's so biblical.
I think like he's almost like Red in Shawshank Redemption.
Yeah, it's Red. I mean, Red's a multiple murder, not rapist, but
exactly.
Too,
and like, but when they, when you think of like when he's gotten his parole hearing and he's just like, I mean, I'll get more into the movie there, but no, I think like he's a sympathetic character, but it is kind of interesting that there is like a just punishment, because he did start a fire to cover up his murder, and then he ends up catching on fire in the electric chair, right? So there is kind of like what Mike was saying, there's like this Christian sense of justice that the punishment does fit the crime in this case.
Would it be set? Well, something that I think about is that, because on one hand you're like, okay, this guy deserves to die. However, if we're talking about a fair justice system, and I'm not pro death penalty, but it is a thing, and it's a thing in this book, obviously. I think where the morality starts to get really dark and get fucked up with what Percy does is that, okay, this guy is already in prison for the rest of his life. He's going to get electrocuted. It is the job of the correctional officers in that facility to make sure that the prisoners are comfortable and safe and not tortured, right? And I think what Percy does is both in how he treats Del just before anything happens, and then obviously what he ends up doing to him in the electric chair, is that it becomes torture, right? And it becomes sadistic, and that's where I think the line of morality is. And it's a tough thing, this novel, because from the get-go we're already in a place where before anything horrible has happened, these characters have done horrible things, right? And so it puts us on some very interesting moral ground. I think it's one of the things I like a lot about the Green Mile. Something I was going to ask you all is that, do you almost wish we saw some of Del's more unsavory aspects of his character? Like, would that go a long way to maybe countering that thing isn't in him anymore? Like, do you want to see anything sadistic in him? I mean, I don't know, because and once again, I don't want to like, it's tough. I don't want to sound like one rape is better than the other, because it's not what I'm trying to say. But I do wonder if Del is just as a person is just lowly and miserable and kind of pathetic, and maybe that's what drove him to do it, rather than Wharton, who seems sadistic. But I don't know, because rape is a sadistic.
And Caffrey, we've been talking about Sopranos, and I think of like Uncle Junior, and when he's institutionalized at the end in sort of the mental hospital jail, do you have to know his past crimes, or do you just sort of see? Yeah, because if you think he's clearly not a threat anymore, and I think Del is long past.
Because if you think about it, like all the people on The Sopranos, they're all murderers. They've all done horrible shit. But I would argue there's a difference between someone like Ralphie and Junior, right? I don't know. What do you guys think?
But I think the authorities too, like, I think they can kind of see Del, and they'll be like, look, we don't really have to worry about this guy. And I know they're trying to keep everyone comfortable, but I think that's more so to make their own jobs easier. So they can sort of, assess the threat. And it's like, look, is this guy going to rock the boat and make our schedule worse, or is he just going to kind of go with the flow? And I think even the fact that they let him have Mr. Jingles mostly unimpeded. It's just like, look, if that keeps him happy, great. I can check out when my shift is over and not worry about this. Great.
Yeah.
What do you make of the sequence right before he dies? He's talking to the preacher.
Oh, Mouseville?
And no, he's speaking something in French, and here's the passage.
Oh yeah, I remember, yeah,
that he had, and I wanted to go over that because he goes, Oh, okay. So Schuster listened to Dell's flood of tear-choked French, nodded as if he understood perfectly, and patted him on the back. He looked at me over the little man's shoulder and said, "I hardly understand a quarter of what he's saying. Don't think it matters," Brutal rumbled. "Neither do I, son," Schuster said with a grin. "He was the best of them, and now I realize I have no idea what became of him. I hope he... wait, where is it? He says something that he didn't understand what was going on with what Dell was saying. And then later on 266, he says, Dell closed his eyes as if to pray, but for a moment said nothing. A frown creased his forehead, and I had a sense of him reaching far back in his mind, as a man may search a small attic room for an object which hasn't been used or needed for a long, long time. I glanced at the clock again and almost said something. Would have, if Brutal hadn't twitched in my sleeve and shaken his head. Then Dale began speaking softly, but quickly in that Cajun which was as round and soft and sensual as a young woman's breast. There's some pound cake there. But
I was like, here you go. Yeah.
And so what do you think's happening here? And he's talking about Saint Marie. I didn't translate any of this stuff because I'm a bad co-host, so I apologize. But what do you think's actually happening with Dell here? And like, what does this say about his character and maybe ties to redemption, ties to atonement? What's going on here?
I think it's humanizing him, and I think he's like that kind of it's something I look at as my own kids, and we're about to watch. We need to talk about Kevin for the other pod.
With your kids?
No, I'm not watching it with them. But I just have been like, sometimes I look at them and I'm like, what? I hope you don't do bad things.
It's a great Thanksgiving watch.
It really is. It's a feel good movie.
Just give Miracle on 34th Street. We're gonna do.
We need to talk about Kevin. Yeah, but I think like it does humanize him, and I have recently gone on some rants about humanizing monsters and how I'm not interested in that unless there's humanization of the victims. And I think this is kind of an interesting take on this because we just hear about his crime like third hand and we never see it. Although we do see enough details of Coffey's crime that I don't need to see Dell's.
I don't want to see that either.
Yeah, and I feel like that kind of it's like a transference of like kind of an equal kind of crime there. And the problem I think that I have a lot of times with that is when we are so humanizing these victims, or we're humanizing the monsters and not the victims. But I don't really have a problem with it here. I think because Dell is so pathetic that it humanizes him, and I think this is working more as a commentary on the death penalty than it is a commentary on like a sexual assault. You know? I feel like that's not what's in the forefront, and it is saying, yes, he did these things. Does he deserve to die? And I think that's something like I wrestle with a lot just in general. And I think it's interestingly presented here.
And I think too, because even the Mouseville sequence where it gets presented in front of it's just other guards and other employees dressed up like they're big shots, I mean, that's kind of pathetic in itself too, even though it's a moment of joy for Dell. You're like, oh no, this guy's life amounts to nothing, right? Even and it probably should amount to nothing because of what he did. Yeah, and it's funny when I'd like that you brought up, well, we need to talk about Kevin, because part of what I get from that book and the movie is that it's humanizing the monster, of course, but it's also showing that there's a commonality between the mom and the monster, right? And that I don't want to say we all have the potential to be rapists and murderers necessarily, but going back to Christianity, right? I mean, if we look at original sin and everything, it's like we all have darkness in us, and we all do have the potential to do bad things. And I don't know, the book doesn't quite go as far with that as I would like it to necessarily, though. There's not much of a divide between me and these men that I have to monitor, but it is something that I think about.
I think too, and I kind of like Mike too. Like, I'm a big advocate of forgiveness, and when I used to intern in the legal system, I would meet a lot of juvenile offenders who you talk to them, you'd play cards, you'd just catch up, and then afterwards you'd hear what crime they committed, and you're just like, wow, I cannot believe that person, is such a violent individual. But I think, Caffrey, you bring up a good point too with the we need to talk about Kevin, that there is that potential within people. And the fact that he tried to cover his crime with a fire, it kind of shows that's a stupid plan, right? You're almost bringing more attention to it. So he seems like he's kind of a simple guy. I think even deep down, he maybe knows that Mr. Jingles is not going to go to the mouse.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you see that right before he gets executed.
But I think it's just, if it makes him, it calms him down. And like that moment where he does kind of pause, I think he knows what's really going on, but he's so in denial that, hey, if this makes him happy, he'll just go with it.
Yeah, I mean, I love that title, The Bad Death of Edward Delacroix, because there's the obvious gruesome element of it, but it's also bad in that, Percy gets in that last dig to him right beforehand, and there's nothing you can do. I mean, it's just sad.
I think that's the meanest part, is when he tells him this is fake.
Yeah.
Even more so than killing him, I think.
It was very Ozymandias,
Yeah, no, totally. Well, I mean, speaking of Mouseville, I do think we should talk about everyone's favorite critter on the Green Mile. And I'm not talking about old Toot Toot. I'm talking about Mr. Jingles, a.k.a. Steamboat Willie. Hey, what's not to like? That's all I'll say. But I love Mr. Jingles.
I know.
I love how he talks about his what does he call them? His oil spot, or his watercolor oil spot eyes. I think it's great. I love the. I don't know. I mean, I'm a sucker for animals and stories, but I really think he just has a lot of character in the way he eats the mints and the spool. And I just is there anyone here who doesn't like Mr. Jingles? If now, speak up.
I think
go ahead.
I just stomp him like the rodent he is.
No, I will say my one problem, and it kind of goes back to Coffee, is I feel like Mr. Jingles has more humanity than John Coffey does.
I know.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Bugs me.
Yeah, that's a good point.
But it's hard not to like him. He's cute, and he like knows the floaters and knows like the regos, which I think is really sweet.
It breaks my heart at the end where he still wants to chase the spool and he's got a little bit of a limp. And it's funny too because I feel like old Paul Edgecombe, he views it as this tragic thing that because he throws the spool, then Brad Wharton comes up, and then while Brad Wharton's talking to him, Mr. Jingles dies, right? And it's funny because I feel like Paul views that as that being horrible because he wasn't able to be with him at the moment he died. But I actually looked at it like, no, man, Mr. Jingles died doing the thing he loves. Like, he actually had a great death, I think. And again, a great life. I mean, God, he gets to live to be however fucking old he is by the end of that. But yeah.
I think he's going through the motions, though, and I think that's also kind of what, most people's lives are at the end. You're just like, well, I have nothing better to do, so I'm just going to go ahead and do this.
It's funny because...
One thing I want to say...
Sorry, go ahead. No, you got it, Pfleegor.
Oh, no, I was going to say, so his life has been expanded unbelievably long. I don't think many mice live that long.
Nope. 70 years? Don't think so.
Yeah.
Hey, Mickey Mouse.
Mike said the term earlier, though, century Paul. Paul, how long is he going to live if Mr. Jingles lived that long?
I like that we don't end with Paul dying, because it would come full circle, but I like that. And I think he's tortured by that because literally everyone else in his life, including the fucking mouse, they're all dead. They're all dead by the end of this. Yeah.
He's just left alone. It's like the ending of it. Like all of a sudden you're gonna have like the 5 Satins playing.
You love the 5 Satins.
It's gonna be playing like the fucking ending of Irishman. He's just gonna be sitting there waiting to die. I love Mr. Jingles, great character, and hoping that Funko finds a place in their heart to make a little Mr. Jingles for the holidays.
Do they have like
the squished version, when he's broken,
No.
the splintered bones?
You could get
that one for you.
I hope they make like instead of him coming with like Dell, because no one's gonna buy a Dell Funko. Maybe we'll make a little a mean little Percy Funko, and you could have like a Mr. Jingles with them.
Do they have any
You
Green
do a
Mile
little
Funkos?
claymation.
I know they have a lot of Stephen King Funkos, but do they have?
They do have a lot. I don't think they're gonna. I doubt they'll probably ever get to the Green Mile.
Yep, I would avoid that one.
Yeah, I don't
Our
think we
Funko.
need to John Coffey.
Yeah, I want my Hal Moore's Warden Funko.
Can you get Melinda Moores to say like come play in my mud hole or whatever?
Oh
it is.
yeah, oh Lord.
Yeah. Well, let's keep going with the humans then. We got nothing but love for Mr. Jingles. I have Dean Stanton next. I don't know. I was debating, should we talk about him and Harry Turwell?
I think as a pair. I
Right,
think they're good as a
kind
pair.
of the same. Yeah, what do you guys think? I weirdly remember them more for Barry Pepper and the other dudes' performances in the movie than I did. In the book, I actually feel like there's not. I mean, we know Dean has kids, and he's kind of Dean is a little bit more of the stick in the mud, not the mud hole, but
I honestly, I glossed over so much with them because it was just like, oh, there's their line, or like they have a line that has to get things to the next point. And I felt like you actually got more about their deaths than you did about their actual their paths. Like, I don't know.
I mean,
They're like
me of
not
6
brutal.
Feet. Yeah, it's like 6 Feet Under though. If you guys watch that show, at the end they tell her every single person dies. So I don't know.
Yeah, I guess that's true. Yeah. Well, I think that's I'm gonna wait till we get to Misery to talk about Dean's death specifically. But I don't know. Do y'all feel like you need more from them? I didn't necessarily. Like I'm kind of fine with it being Paul and Brutal, and then these sort of auxiliary guys in addition to like I like that they're just kind of strong, decent supporting characters. I mean, Harry's the one I really feel like I don't know anything about. Dean, I at least get. I get that Dean's a little bit of a know-it-all. He doesn't like to be called out when he's wrong. He likes to follow the rules. Harry, I feel like other than he's younger, I don't really get much from him. But I don't know. I wasn't. Yeah. There's so many other strong characters in the book, and I don't even think that they're weak characters. We just don't know a ton about them. I don't know if I needed to know a ton about them. But
no, I think you get just enough. You know?
What about you, Jen? What are your thoughts on them?
The only real thought I have, and I can't even remember which one it is because they're really just the second and third after Brutal. But there's one point where I think it's Harry who's the one that has the kids, and he's like, "Well, would you like to explain to my wife and kids while their dad?" Like his position as like a family man is used as like to bump up his life in a way that it doesn't happen with John Coffey. And I think I was really frustrated by that a lot of times when I was reading it this time that I hadn't really noticed before.
Yeah,
and that's really the only thing about him.
His life is seen as more valuable because he has kids or whatever, as opposed to this dude who's gonna die. Well, I mean, we can just keep on going then. I know. I mean, I feel once again, I think it's because it's from the perspective of Paul, and then everything is centered around John Coffey. I mean, I feel like once we get to some of these other characters, it is easy to breeze by them. Well, let's go down to the mud hole, and we'll talk. We'll talk about Hal and Melinda Moores. I weirdly feel like there's more to talk about with Melinda. Hal is just kind of I mean, I don't know. Something,
Hal is there.
Yeah.
I don't know. I have something to say about Hal.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, go for it. Yeah, because
this is the thing I think that, my number one problem with the book, I think, reading it this time, is that Paul does not tell Hal that Coffey is innocent, and it's like this, and it's like seen as this mercy for him, where Hal is the one who got his wife back. Like he arguably got the biggest reward out of this, so he would be the one to, I think, really be able to wrestle with that, and he's really the one that should, and I think it just speaks to this kind of problem with, like, when we talk about race and racial bias, that he is seen as too fragile to handle this knowledge of this terrible thing that he is a party to without knowing about it. And it's like the weight, Paul is bearing this weight on his own. And I think that just speaks to how we get to a place where people can't understand that racism still exists.
Yeah.
Because they were never presented with the pain that it caused, because it was too hard for them to understand.
Well, it's kind of fucked up too, because I mean, even though he doesn't get it confirmed to him that John Coffey is innocent, Hal still witnesses the guy heal his fucking wife.
Exactly.
And even if he okay, maybe in Hal Moore's mind, maybe he does think that John Coffey still killed and raped and killed these two girls. But you don't even see him wrestle with that complexity. The fact that,
he just walks away.
He just kind of walks away from it. And I think that King is a little bit aware of that. I don't know. It's
because Paul's really angry at him.
He is, yeah. And who is it?
I felt that anger.
Yeah, and it's good old James Cromwell, right, in the movie, who we love, but I can be mad at him.
He's my forever Father Callahan, by the way.
He is great. I mean, it's
That'll
funny
do, pig.
What do you say?
That'll do, pig. That'll do.
I think of him in LA Confidential too. Like, he's great.
Oh yeah. And he's a little bit of that here in this book, because he's a turncoat. No, I'm just joking. He's not a turncoat, but
turnkey.
Yeah, his ignorance speaks volumes.
But also, I think legally, Warden can't overturn a sentence that the justice system imposes on someone. So I don't know. There's not a whole lot they could do.
Yeah,
legally.
I just wanted him to feel bad about it, I think. I wanted him to,
But I also think, too, because he was already, in the throes of agony with his wife dying. And
I mean, I do like
all kinds of profanity. So I think he already is kind of a broken man. So I don't even know if he's processing what's happening.
I was going to say, I do agree with Jen that I do want to. I mean, not that I need to see it, because I think it's supposed to be frustrating. But yeah, he does piss me off in that regard. On the other hand, I do like that we see this dude who is once formidable be kind of just broken by all this, see that. I mean, that seemed that I don't know. I had this teacher when I was 9, at Seven Springs Elementary, and a really good teacher, but then he just started acting kind of sad and mean toward us a little bit. And then he like told all of us as kids, I may have mentioned this on the podcast before, he like sat all of us 9 and 10-year-olds down one day and talked about how him and his wife were getting divorced, and that's how he was acting like that. And I remember just being like, on one hand, I respect the vulnerability and the honesty. On the other hand, I'm like, I don't know if you need to tell a class full of kids you're supposed to be taking care of.
Was it during like arts and crafts?
No,
like
it was literally
Wet Hot American Summer. It's just like
It was kind of like that a little bit. But he did say, he's like, oh, I'm sorry. I know I've been a jerk to all of you. I'm going through this thing, and I still remember that very distinctly. But it was this weird thing of like, oh, you're seeing this authority figure with a lot of charisma who you've always respected just sort of fall apart in front of you. So that did resonate.
It's like today's word of the day, kids, is divorce.
Is prenup. As in, I wish I had signed a prenup.
Yeah, it just like goes off.
No, but but I don't know. I kind of, like I said, on one hand, I'm like, ugh, that was weird. But on the other hand, I'm like, I kind of respect that. What do y'all think about Melinda? I mean, we don't really get to see much. We're told she was this radiant woman until she started, until her brain tumor turned her into like Richard Pryor.
I have a lot of
should we save it for Pound Cake?
Misery and Count Cake are a bunch in there.
Yeah,
we'll save it. Okay, I mean, because she really is defined by this sickness,
possession,
and then also we've talked about a lot at this point, but is probably the purveyor of the magical Negro stereotype with just, oh, I dreamed of you, like she gets that.
Yes, yeah.
But I don't know if there's much more to say about it.
I just think Patricia Clarkson, again, I didn't realize how tied this was to the movie.
Yeah,
for
she's
me,
great. Yeah,
that's who I see in my head, and that scene when she finally cured and she just looks so beautiful and at ease.
I will say there is a little bit. King does this with his sick characters a lot. There is a little bit of Zelda and a little bit of Larry's mom from The Stand.
Yeah.
He does this thing where characters get sick and they just become delirious and filthy. It's a very
and it's like King is just like, well, here's my stage and I'm going to scream out all of the obscenities that I have in my head. It's so
funny,
over the
man.
top.
Yeah. We'll save those for Misery and or Pound Cake.
One thing I think about Melly is I think she kind of represents, she's the white victim in this story, and she is the right to the imbalance established in the first part, because we have the two white little girls who Coffee cannot save, and then by the end he has righted that wrong by saving Melly. And what I think frustrates me is the actual wrong is Coffee's fate, so that frustrates me. But I love speaking of Hal again, one of my favorite moments in the entire book is when he finally understands that she's better. And I think, he is broken apart, and that's so hard to watch. And it really gives you a lot, makes you think about people who watch their loved ones die. And I think the relief on his face when Paul says, no, the scans were clear, none of this happened. And we get to we have that cathartic release that he's like, okay, this is over now. This nightmare is over. So,
we did get some reprieve. Well, cool. Let's move on to old Toot Toot, who's who I always thought, I got really confused as a kid that Harry Dean Stanton plays him in the movie, and then we have a character named Harry, and then we have a character named Dean Stanton.
And Dean.
King had to have been aware of that, right? I'm sure he's a Harry Dean Stanton fan. Is that who knows? It doesn't matter.
He had already been in Christine.
Oh, duh, he's fucking in Christine. So I feel like that was a tribute. Maybe that was why they got him. So old Toot Toot, who is the trustee. So did they ever say what he was in prison for or not? I don't think so.
I think just being gross,
just being a nasty old dude. I mean,
being gross.
He's like, get him out of here.
So here's something, because I love this character. And I actually think he's legit funny when he's making all his gallows humor during the mock executions. But it's funny because there was nothing. I actually didn't think Toot Toot was that egregious or that objectionable. But King in it describes Paul as him thinking that there's not much of a difference between Toot Toot and Percy, that if things had gone a different way, both of them could have been the other. But I actually didn't think that. Toot Toot to me didn't. I mean, he seemed to be a little cunning, I guess, but I didn't think he was especially sadistic or horrible. I was actually taken a little aback by that comparison. But what did the rest of you think?
He's just an opportunist. I think.
Yeah, I
He's
guess
a
maybe
clown.
that's what he means. So you think maybe that's what he means, like not so much the sadism, but the opportunism and just the craftiness.
I think Mike putting it as a clown is actually really good.
Yeah.
Because he's a trustee, right?
Yeah.
So he's got privileges that the other inmates don't have. And I think he knows part of his job is to introduce that levity to the guards.
Yeah.
So
And
he does his little song and dance, so they might act like they're annoyed, but I think they'd rather deal with a guy doing that. Than,
Yeah, well, maybe that's
someone-
maybe that goes
Well,
back to what I said about Paul having to stick up his ass more in this than he does in the movie. Like, because Paul's like, I didn't like Toot Toot much. I'm like, oh no, Toot Toot's pretty awesome.
I think it's because
it's pretty awesome.
But I think it's because Paul, or he just doesn't like the sense of humor when it comes to the mile, because there's just no place for humor, you know.
It's the laughing at the. What does he say? Like, oh, have you ever been in church and tried not to laugh at a joke? Right? He's worried that Toot Toot's humor is going to result in someone bursting out into laughter during.
Well, maybe I mean there's also could be an unwritten story in which Toot Toot tried to sell him like a snack, and Paul just like really didn't like the moon pie that he got. It
would be really funny. You know what King always does, like on his website? Oh, like I'm going to write this book or this book next. Which one should it be? He's like, all right, I'm going to write the 8th official Dark Tower book, like next in the sequence, or I'm going to write a spin-off story about Paul
Toot Toot.
getting
Toot
a bad
Toot.
moon pie.
Yeah,
Toot
and then like the Russian bots hack the voting, and like they make it so that Toot Toot wins.
he has to. Yeah, it's like Toot Toot's Grand Adventure.
Well, there you go. It's Toot Toot. Sorry, that was the last chance for Dark Tower 8.
He's like, guys, like, Tab, I can't believe I have to write this Toot Toot thing. She's like, Steven, I told you, you should have never given them that option. Yes, you're right.
Toot Toot, the day the clown cried.
Oh Lord, I love Toot Toot.
Yeah, I like him. I got some funny pound cake stuff. I want to share. Anything else we want to say about old Toot before we? Yeah, we're good. All right, so I wrote this guy down, and I don't know. I don't know if we need to talk about him because once again, it really ties back to the racial element, which I do feel like we've talked a lot about. But does anyone have anything to say about Bert Hammersmith, the reporter that Paul goes to inquire about John Coffey? I mean, it's weird. We do get this more. It's funny because Bert Hammersmith, I think, fancies himself an intellectual, but he still obviously views black people as being less than. And he gives this horrible metaphor about this dog who turned on his kid one day that he had to kill, and he makes that comparison to John Coffey. And I think that weirdly wakes up Paul a little bit, even if Paul doesn't end up acting on it. But what else do we think about him?
He's like many characters, especially on Paul's Rue Morgue quest, where he's trying to play detective, where he's an ideological instrument. He basically serves to purport King's what I was saying before, like the manifesto, the anti capital punishment, and also just how the system's broken. Like this guy leans again on these platitudes, like the whole likening Coffee to the dog.
Yeah, it's horrible.
It's
I mean,
just,
and I think King knows it's horrible too. I mean, I think that's
Right.
Oh no, he does though. He does. But you get a lot of characters like that. You get it like with the one sheriff who's ultimately gonna comes in and
Priebus,
I think
is that his name or something?
Yeah, the one who spills over the chair. Yeah. So I think there's these characters serve strictly just for that, these ideology. But
I feel like, first of all, I want to say the memory of Gary Sinise is doing a lot of work
Yes.
when I read this because I love him. But I feel like Hammersmith is what King is afraid he is, and Paul is what he wants to be. And I think the scene is him kind of working that out.
Yeah. I mean, it is interesting because it does show, and once again, I think it's frustrating because of the outcome of the book in many ways, but it does show. It's weird. I don't think this comes across always in how King writes black characters, the complexities of race, but I do think it comes across in how he writes these two white characters. And there is I don't know if this is so much a talking point in fiction, but certainly as in theater, is like whiteness is a thing that you write about and you can write about as a white person, right? Like it's this idea that like, no, there are levels to how racism works, and it all comes from the same place, of course, but there are different levels in which it manifests itself. And I especially in the year 2020, I did appreciate seeing both of those perspectives, but at the end of the day, they do all come from the same place, and
they end in the same
exactly.
place
That's with Coffee. Like, I mean, Paul Edgecombe does not alter Coffey's outcome, even though he has this very pivotal discussion with Burt Hammersmith.
Right.
Yeah.
And so then the argument is, does it matter if you're Paul or,
exactly, yeah.
or Hammersmith if it
Yeah.
all ends in the same place?
Yeah, especially back then. So yeah, I guess it is kind of a pivotal thing. Yeah, and Gary Sinise, he's great in that role, man. And it's funny too because
such stunt casting too.
Yeah,
because it was like literally like 4 years after
The
was
Stand.
it 5 years?
Yeah. And also too, it's funny. I remember loving the Green Mile trailer as a kid, like just getting choked up when they played the music, and I still think it's a really good trailer. But I rewatched it, and it's funny because they show one of Gary Sinise's lines where it's like, oh, it's like he just dropped out of the sky. And if you watch that not knowing who he is playing or having not read the book, you'd be like, oh, he's going to be like a really sympathetic
I know.
character. And then you're like, no, he's awful. He's really, really, really horrible.
No, I just recall that I don't think he did it.
Oh, dude, he was. I don't think he did it at all. Like he gives it this like machine gun cadence. I don't think he did it at all. Cool. So I only have two more fairly minor but still important characters to get through. The first is you know what? I didn't write her down. I guess maybe that's a good point to talk about both of them. So we have I wrote down Elaine Connolly, who is Paul's, I don't want to say love interest, but sort of his platonic significant other, special friend later on.
It reminds me of my grandmother, who my grandfather, who literally held the family together because they're all a bunch of alcoholics. But they when he passed away, all hell broke loose, and after that, my grandmother would see a lot of friends.
Yeah,
and they'd always come over and I'd be like, oh, is this your boyfriend? No,
he's
yada yada is my friend, my special friend. I'm like, what? You're fucking full of shit. Like. He's like living in the house.
Susan's grandmother is the same. She lives in a I guess not an assisted living facility, but an assisted living neighborhood in South Africa. And same thing. And she's like, they're like, oh yeah, your grandmother's been seeing this like guy who's coming over, and she's like, no, he's just a friend. And then I'm like, I don't know. I mean,
right.
I guess it depends. Let's not get gross, but I think it depends on how well the plumbing is working for all of them. You know what I'm saying? Like how that's the difference between
how strong those hips still are.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, but yeah. What are your everyone's thoughts on Elaine? I mean, I think she is just kind of the person for Paul to tell the story to, right? And it is, especially at the end of the novel, we get to this cyclical nature of, okay, he's seeing a repeat of Percy. He's seeing a repeat of his own wife. And
she's the Ellen Page in Inception.
Yeah, she kind of is. She's kind of this conduit for this. And I didn't mind that necessarily. It's another case of, I don't know if I needed much more from her other than to be this, be someone for Paul to spend time with later on, then also to hear the story, right? Like we need the reader character. But
yeah, I think too, also like her connections, because isn't it her grandson is in the House of Representatives?
Yeah.
So it's an example of someone using their connections in a good way.
No, totally.
So kind of pushes Brad away versus Percy. Yeah, exactly. Like I think it's just
when I like that she takes that gamble too, right? Because she doesn't really know. She's like, I don't know if this is really going to work, but it does, right? Like she actually does stand up to Brad, and I like that someone from modern times gets to meet Mr. Jingles also. I think she's as taken by him as she could be. Well, I mean, what do you all think between, because once again, she is kind of the stand-in for Janice Edgecombe, Paul's wife later on. I mean, do you think there's like how similar do you all think they are? Like, do they kind of fall in the same category, or are they their own characters, or what?
I think so. I think if we got more of Elaine having to talk to Paul as all of this is going down the way Jan does, I feel like they probably would have said a lot of the same things. I think Jan really kind of serves as Paul's conscience in a lot of ways, and kind of like the sounding board for him.
Yeah.
Are we talking about her yet? Or
let's go on to Jan, because I think they're so wrapped up. Well, something I was wondering, because I agree with the conscience thing, but then it is because, like I said, I was rooting for Jan during that conspiring scene with him and all the guys, when she's like, no, what the fuck's wrong with you all? But then she still does kind of placate Paul at the end of it, right?
Yep.
I mean,
poor old Paul.
Yeah, and her whole thing is like, well, okay, if you want to die, then that's fine, I guess. But yeah, but I actually really like her in the scene where she stands up to all them and she's like, no, what you're all doing is wrong, So
and doesn't immediately let them off the hook either.
I kind of wish it was like the ending of The Notebook, when she like finishes reading, Paul's story. And instead of it, being a thing on Alzheimer's or amnesia, she just like looks at him and she's like, "Get away! Who are you? Get away from me!" Like, and it's just like, "No, I'm sorry. No, I'm a good guy. No, you're awful. You're despicable." And they just
you let that man die. What the fuck? Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I mean, he did.
Yeah. Well, anything else anyone wants to say about Jan and or Elaine? I mean, in it ton, but
maybe this was misery for me, but I thought like Jan's reaction to like, destroying all the table setting was a little over the top. Like, it just felt like King being like, all right, we got to make sure she really proves a point. But like, I was like trying to visualize that actually happening. And I was just like, this would be a little too histrionic for me. Like, it doesn't need to be this crazy. Like, she already was making her point. Like, you didn't have to have her throwing dishes off. It just seemed a little
hysterical
much.
Woman kind of thing. Yeah.
Yes, and it's like the what is she going to eat on now? She smashed all her dishes.
I mean,
also, if you've ever tried to clear off a table like that, like I found that out when I was trying to knock that Jenga tower over. Like, it takes a while. Then some of the steam's gone out of you once you've like missed.
We had a whole thing too in the last play I wrote before leaving grad school and or graduating, and that got performed. Is we had this moment where Susan, my wife, she had to climb onto a table and swipe off all this stuff, and and what we discovered on stage is that it takes forever to fucking clean that up. Like it's like really hard. They always show it in movies like it's nothing. We had to figure out like a way to. And the play's on real time. There's no scene breaks. So okay, we had to figure out a way to clean this up so it's not a fucking hazard for everyone. And also,
the glass gets everywhere.
Like it was crazy.
Yeah.
We'd there's a thing that gets thrown that we had to hit a specific place on the wall so it didn't destroy everything. But anyway, what were you saying?
God.
Jeez. No, I was gonna tell you one just glass table story. Our friend Bo was visiting us in college, and we had this like dining set in the backyard. We never mowed our lawn, piece of shit. And we were like, you can do anything back here. So Bo picks up a brick and breaks our table, and it's just glass in our backyard for the rest of the evening.
And he's like, oh, anything?
Yeah, we were like, oh.
What an asshole.
It was funny.
Bo's a big tower head too. So the last character then, and here's and villains is usually the longest category before we go on to some of the light and fun categories, is Arlen Bitterbuck, the chief, who actually really... man, he was more of a significant part in the book for me than before, because he's someone whose example of the system isn't fair. Like, yes, he did kill someone, but it was in this drunken fight, and he like hit the dude with the cinder block. Right now, I'm not saying that makes him a great person, but he was someone who I was left thinking like, oh, I don't know if this is a violent guy in the way that the other ones are, and like it seems like he actually had a pretty good life outside of prison too.
And Paul's pretty dismissive of him, and that's where I kind of felt what you all were saying about his attitude is that Bitterbuck like really felt like a tragic character, especially when you meet his family and just like the you got to see
he's respected elder in his tribe and everything, and and also
too really sad.
Just once again, I'm not saying what he did was not wrong, but it sounds like it was a drunken fight that got really out of control, and
the guy sounded like an asshole. I mean,
the guy had to come. He stole his boots or whatever it was. Yeah, and I love is it Graham Greene who plays him in the movie? I love his performance too. So. Yeah, but
I think Bitterbuck is like the personification of the good prisoner, and like this is what this character, and I mean he is a minority character also. Like this is how you are supposed to act, and everybody else on the Green Mile is measured against him by either being better or worse.
Even the Prez,
I don't think he has
because the Prez is someone who gets off and gets killed later, but he arguably did something worse than Bitterbuck because of his intent, because he knew what he was doing, and he Bitterbuck gets killed and he doesn't, which doesn't seem fair,
Right.
Yeah. All right. Well, that was a pretty hefty category, and I know we've touched on some pretty hefty topics. So here's what we're going to do, because we're already clocking, I think, I'm not keeping track, but 2.5 hours or so. We're going to pull a Needful Things, and we're going to split this up into a second episode. So tune in next week, and we'll have, it'll be a little bit breezier. We got some misery to talk about. We got some pound cake. We've got some cemetery overall thoughts, of course. So
the word processor of the gods.
Yeah, and I think we'll have a lot in that category, because I have a lot of passages I want to talk about. So please do tune in. And hey, we're just giving you more free content. So you're welcome. In the words of Alec Baldwin, you're welcome.
Nice. Not controversial at all.
No. But for real, thank you all for listening as always. And come back next week and we will finish up the Green Mile, and we'll have a bunch more announcements of the episodes we have coming up. We've got. Don't worry, we're not going to leave you hanging, even though it's the holidays. I'd say we'll have even more content than normal. So,
totally.
Yes. Yeah. All right. So until then, let's do it, everyone. Let's say a long days
and pleasant nights.
We'll see you next time.
I got some hot friends, but God, I got some hot friends. I got some hot friends. I got some hot friends. But you know you want somebody to treat you good.
Consequence Podcast Network.